I sat there at the end of the long restaurant table, my old brown blazer catching the glow of the chandelier like a mistake that refused to fade. Laughter rippled around me, expensive, rehearsed, and then came his voice, sharp enough to cut through the hum. "Did Goodwill have a clearance sale, Charles?" My son-in-law smirked as forks paused mid-air. The waiter froze, the music seemed to hush, and for a moment, even my daughter couldn't meet my eyes. I smiled instead, small, controlled, the kind of smile that hides the first flicker of revenge. "Before the story begins, tell me, where are you watching from? I hope your day's gentle and calm. Please like, subscribe, and let's start our story together." The azure room shimmered with glass and ego that night. Seattle's skyline glowed through the tall windows, a drizzle tracing silver threads down the glass. Inside, laughter clinked with crystal, the sound of people who wanted to be seen. Travis Reed was in his element. Every movement of his cuff-linked wrist, every overconfident grin, felt like a silent announcement of ownership. Across from him sat Charles Bennett, 68, shoulders slightly stooped, dressed in a clean but worn brown blazer that had seen more Decembers than Travis had seen pay raises. The table was an exhibition of wealth, a bottle of imported Bordeaux, seared scallops, minimalist plating that cost a working man's week. Charles held his spoon gently, tracing the edge of his napkin as he listened. He didn't belong here, not in their eyes at least. Then it came, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Did Goodwill have a clearance sale, Charles?" Travis smirked, swirling his wine. The joke sliced through the polite murmur like glass against porcelain. The other guests, friends from Travis's company, a few spouses, even Olivia, froze in their seats. Someone laughed softly, then stopped when Olivia's expression tightened. Olivia reached across the table, her voice gentle but firm. "Travis, that's enough." Travis only grinned wider. "I'm just saying, if you're dining at the Azure Room, maybe step up from vintage yard sale chic." Charles's hand paused mid-air. He looked up, not with anger, but with something steadier. His gaze met Travis's, and the restaurant's lights reflected in his eyes like two small, precise flames. "Comfort," he said, tone even, "isn't something I buy." Olivia looked at her father, her face flushed with equal parts love and embarrassment. She wanted to apologize, but Charles spared her. He simply picked up the menu again, his calm as deliberate as his breathing. When the waiter approached, Charles ordered soup, tomato bisque, no garnish. Simple, like him. The dinner stumbled forward after that, laughter resuming but thinner now, the kind that hides discomfort under forced smiles. Travis filled the space with more talk, about the company, about a new acquisition, about how the market rewards confidence. He leaned back, smug and shiny in his tailored suit. Charles barely spoke. He listened, measured, cataloged. He noticed how Travis handled the staff, polite in tone but dismissive in eyes. He noticed Olivia trying to keep peace, her smile trembling as she filled glasses. And he noticed the waiter's subtle confusion when handing over the check, a glance toward the wrong person at the table. That's when Travis decided to push the joke further. When the bill arrived, he flicked his wrist and slid the leather folder across the white linen toward Charles. "You got this, right?" he said, loud enough for the nearby table to hear again. "I mean, accountants love numbers." Olivia's eyes widened in disbelief. "Travis!" But Charles didn't flinch. He opened the folder, glanced at the total, 4 digits, and a pretentious tip suggestion printed neatly at the bottom. He smiled faintly, as though studying an old equation. Then he looked up at his son-in-law. "Always happy," he said quietly, voice calm as a balance sheet, "to settle things properly." The words hung there, clean and unhurried. Even Travis didn't quite know how to respond. The waiter, unsure whom to thank, waited awkwardly as Charles reached for his own card, a modest one, scratched at the edges but reliable. As the waiter walked away, Travis chuckled again, but softer this time, the sound uncertain. Didn't mean to offend, Charles. Just kidding around. Charles nodded, eyes returning to the window. I know, he said. Some lessons start as jokes. The waiter returned with the receipt. Charles signed it neatly, initials small but precise. The pen moved like a man balancing a ledger, not for show, but for record. He placed the pen down, folded his napkin carefully, and stood. Lovely evening, he said. I should be going. Early morning tomorrow. Olivia stood too, touching his arm. Dad, he smiled gently. It's fine, sweetheart. I enjoyed the soup. Then he left. No raised voice, no visible wound. Only quiet, deliberate composure. Outside, the rain met him with soft applause against his blazer. He pulled it tighter, glancing once at the reflection of the Azure Room's glowing sign in a puddle. Inside, laughter resumed, but thinner now, hollow around the edges. Charles walked to the curb, the faint trace of a smirk forming as he muttered under his breath, always happy to settle things properly. The streetlight flickered above him, catching in his glasses as he stepped into the rain. The night was young, and somewhere deep inside, something had shifted, slow, precise, like a ledger quietly opening to a new page. The rain hadn't stopped since dinner. Seattle's streets glistened under the streetlights, reflecting streaks of red and gold from passing cars. The city looked beautiful in that cold, distant way, like something meant to be admired, not touched. Inside the black SUV, the warmth of the heater mixed awkwardly with silence. Olivia drove, both hands tight on the wheel. The wipers thudded rhythmically, wiping away streaks of water, but not the tension hanging in the air. Travis leaned back in the passenger seat, scrolling through his phone like the night hadn't happened. In the back seat, Charles sat beside Noah, his reflection flickering in the rain-smeared window. I'm sorry, Dad, Olivia said finally, her voice low. He didn't mean it the way it sounded. Travis gave a half smile without looking up. Come on, Liv. It was a joke. He needs to lighten up. Olivia's jaw tightened. That wasn't a joke. You humiliated him in front of everyone. Charles's gaze stayed on the skyline, the towers, the rain, the blurred lights smearing into one another. He said nothing. His fingers rested loosely on his lap. But his knuckles were pale. Each passing traffic light painted his face in flickering shades of red and green, like signals flashing across an inner map he hadn't read in years. I'm fine, sweetheart, he said after a long pause. The voice was calm, too calm. People reveal themselves when they think you're beneath them. Olivia blinked back frustration. She knew that tone, polite, deliberate, the kind of calm that always came before one of her father's long silences. Travis laughed softly. You're taking it too seriously, sir. Everyone laughed. It was light-hearted. Charles turned his head slightly, eyes sharp, but still gentle. Light-hearted, he repeated, testing the word as if it were a number that didn't add up. The rest of the car ride was swallowed by rain. The sound filled the silence like static, but inside Charles's mind, it was louder. Memories of years spent at his desk balancing other men's ledgers, correcting their errors, watching them profit off his precision. He remembered long nights of sacrifice, saving every cent to build the family that now looked at him as if he were an antique. He stared at the city skyline again, its glass towers rising like cold monuments to arrogance. He mocks work he's never done, he murmured, so softly it almost disappeared under the hum of the engine. But Noah heard him. The boy looked up from his phone, his eyes curious, searching his grandfather's face. Grandpa, are you mad? Charles turned, the faintest smile curving his lips. No, Noah, he said gently. I'm patient. The boy frowned, not understanding the weight of that word. Olivia's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. She caught that look on her father's face. Not anger, not even pain, but a quiet, precise focus. It was the look of a man adding columns in his mind, finding where something didn't balance, and knowing exactly how it eventually would. Travis sighed, muttering something about sensitive old men, and leaned back again. His reflection in the window blurred and warped with every raindrop. Charles didn't look at him. He didn't need to. The silence said enough. The SUV rolled to a stop at a red light. The rain outside turned heavier, hitting the roof like ticking clocks. Charles glanced at the droplets streaking down the glass, tracing their lines with his eyes, as if studying patterns only he could see. He could feel Olivia's guilt hanging in the air, and for a moment, he pitied her, caught between two men who measured worth in very different currencies. As the light turned green, the car moved again, gliding through the watery glow of the city. Charles straightened slightly, eyes fixed on nothing in particular, but his mind sharpening. Something had shifted tonight, not in anger, but in alignment. He folded his hands, the motion deliberate. Outside, lightning flashed over the bay, followed by a low, distant rumble that vibrated through the car. The storm outside mirrored the quiet storm brewing behind his calm expression. Controlled, building, waiting. Olivia pulled into his driveway and cut the engine. "Dad," she began, but he stopped her with a small, reassuring nod. "Get Noah home safe," he said softly. "It's just rain." He stepped out into it without an umbrella, his brown blazer darkening instantly. The door shut gently behind him, muffling the sound of the storm. For a moment, he stood there, looking up at the sky as thunder rolled again. No anger, no rush, just a quiet man standing in the rain, the faint glint of resolve in his eyes, like the first flicker of a flame that would not go out. The cafe was quiet, the kind that smelled of roasted beans and rain-soaked coats. Charles sat by the window, watching droplets race down the glass, a book unopened beside his cup. He'd always liked mornings like this, quiet, measured, predictable. Until Helen Carter called. He saw her before she spoke. Same gray streak in her hair, same brisk walk, the same practical handbag she'd carried back when they were both at the firm. She'd always been sharper than most men in the room, but never needed to say it out loud. She sat down, sliding off her raincoat with a familiar sigh. "Still early," she said, smiling as she stirred her coffee. "I see retirement hasn't made you lazy." "Habits don't retire," Charles replied. His voice was warm, but his eyes studied her tone, reading between her words like an old accountant scanning a ledger. "You said you wanted to talk about something important." Helen leaned in, lowering her voice. "Paragon Systems." Charles's brow lifted. "Travis's company." She nodded, taking a sip. "I'm auditing them this quarter. The board requested a full expense sweep. Seems their CEO has a generous interpretation of business-related." Charles didn't move, but his fingers tightened around the coffee cup. "Go on." Helen pulled a small notepad from her bag, flipping it open to a page filled with figures and handwritten notes. A few anomalies in their company credit logs, recurring high-end restaurant bills, miscellaneous expenses, private flights listed as networking trips. You'd be amazed how creativity thrives when people think no one's checking the math. A thin smile crossed Charles's face, though his eyes stayed fixed on the window. "Discrepancies, you said?" "Plenty. One stood out this week. A charge from the Azure Room." The name landed like a coin hitting glass. The noise of the cafe dimmed in his mind. He turned slowly to face her. "The Azure Room?" She looked at him curiously. "You know it?" Charles's gaze sharpened, but his tone stayed polite. "Recently dined there." Helen glanced back at her notes. "Four-figure bill. Paid on a corporate card. Signed by Travis Reed. Date was 2 nights ago." For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, a bus rolled past, splashing water onto the curb. Inside, the air between them tightened. Charles leaned back, the faintest lift of amusement tugging at one corner of his mouth. I think my son-in-law accidentally paid with the wrong card. Helen's eyebrow arched. You think? I know the difference between personal and professional expenses, Charles said, his voice soft but cutting. So does he. Or should. Helen studied him, reading the undertone. She'd seen that look before. The calm before Charles dismantled entire budgets with a few quiet numbers. Charles, she said carefully, I can flag it, but if I do, the board will know. It's not small change. It opens a bigger audit. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he watched the steam curl off his coffee, like thought made visible. His reflection in the window looked older than he remembered, but not weaker. Don't flag it yet, he said finally. Sometimes. A pattern is worth more than a single mistake. Helen nodded slowly, understanding more than he said. You're not planning something rash, are you? Rash? He smiled faintly. No, just thorough. She chuckled softly, shaking her head. You always were a ledger man. Nothing escaped you. Still true, he said, especially when the numbers hit close to home. He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small notebook, the same one he'd used for years when tracking small investments, tax notes, and memories. He flipped to a clean page and wrote a date at the top, the Azure Room. Helen watched him, her expression shifting between admiration and quiet concern. Charles, she said, whatever you're thinking. He closed the notebook with deliberate care. I'm thinking accidents are expensive, Helen, and I've always believed in proper accounting. She sighed, but smiled anyway. Still the same old Charles, quiet, patient, terrifying when provoked. He chuckled lightly, finishing his coffee. I don't provoke, Helen. I reconcile. Outside, the rain began to ease, sunlight briefly breaking through the clouds. Charles stood, slipping the notebook into his jacket pocket. Send me whatever reports are public. I'll keep it between us. Helen tilted her head. For now? He gave her that same calm smile, the kind that never revealed its true weight. For now. As he stepped outside, the sound of the rain returned, softer now but steady. He walked towards the bus stop, hands in his pockets, his mind already cataloging numbers, dates, receipts, not out of anger, but precision. Each drop that hit the pavement felt like the tick of a clock. He didn't rush. He never did. But the equation had begun. The morning light slid weakly through the blinds, falling across Charles's small kitchen table, the same table where he'd done taxes, balanced budgets, and taught Olivia how to count with dimes and quarters. His coffee sat untouched. The phone beside it buzzed once, then again, until the sound became impossible to ignore. It was Olivia. A message, then another. Dad, please don't look at the family chat. Charles frowned. The warning only deepened his curiosity. He picked up the phone, thumbed through the messages, and opened the group. There it was. The photo. A grainy snapshot from that dinner at the Azure Room. Someone, probably one of Travis's friends, had caught him mid-laugh, soup spoon halfway to his lips, wearing that same old brown blazer. The caption across the image read, Budget Grandpa Strikes Again, sponsored by Goodwill. Underneath, emojis of laughter filled the thread. Charles scrolled slowly. He saw Travis's name, joking replies, even one from a distant cousin. Come on, that jacket's older than me. Olivia's single reply sat near the bottom. This isn't funny. Delete it. No one had. The phone dimmed as the screen locked, reflecting his face. The faintest quiver in his jaw, the kind that wasn't anger, but something colder, more focused. Olivia called moments later. Dad, I told them it was wrong. I'm so sorry. Don't be, he said evenly. You can't control how children behave once they think they've outgrown you. She hesitated. You're not even mad? Charles's eyes drifted toward the window, where the rain had returned, tapping softly against the glass like a metronome marking time. Numbers never lie, he said finally, voice quiet but sure. People do. He ended the call gently, no bitterness, no drama, just silence. The phone stayed on the table as he reached for the leather file box under the counter. The lid creaked open. Inside were decades of papers, tax returns, estate documents, trust records, old bank statements, his personal history written in ink and decimals. He worked slowly, methodically, the way he always had, sorting, reading, cross-referencing. Time dissolved around him, the clock ticking softly in the corner. His fingers paused on a faded document, Bennett Family Trust, 2008. He scanned down the page, his lips moving silently as he read. Then his eyes froze. There it was. Line 14. Equity investment, Paragon Systems, Inc. 2.5% initial seed. He sat back, stunned for a moment, then let out a low, humorless laugh. He'd forgotten. The company that had made Travis rich had been partially built on his own modest investment, a seed he'd planted when the business was nothing but ambition and borrowed capital. He traced the line again, letting the irony sink in. I may not have money to burn, he murmured, the faintest edge of satisfaction under his breath. But I have receipts. The words hung in the air like a quiet oath. He folded the document neatly and placed it aside, the paper suddenly heavier in meaning. His mind moved quickly now, numbers connecting, possibilities unfolding like a chessboard he just realized he could still play. Every cruel joke, every mocking laugh had been recorded against a man who still had standing in the very company they all worshipped. The phone rang again. This time he answered before the first buzz ended. Helen, he said. Charles, she replied, her tone brisk but curious. You sound different. Did you find something? I did, he said, glancing at the trust paper. A small share, forgotten but active. Helen let out a short breath. Well, that makes you a stakeholder. You know what that means, don't you? He smiled faintly, his reflection catching in the window. Older, calmer, but sharper than before. It means I can ask for a few files without raising suspicion. A beat of silence followed. Then Helen's voice softened. What are you thinking? He looked down at the brown blazer draped neatly over the chair beside him. Its fabric was worn, frayed at the cuffs, but clean, a relic of a man who lived within his means and never apologized for it. Let's balance the books, he said simply. Helen laughed quietly, the kind of laugh that held both admiration and warning. I should have known. Just be careful, Charles. He ended the call without answering. The rain outside had steadied, no longer frantic, just constant, like the rhythm of resolve. Charles folded the trust papers into a clean envelope, placed it atop the blazer, and looked at both for a long moment. The humiliation had turned into something else. Clarity, perhaps. A man who once counted pennies was now counting opportunities. As the light outside dimmed and the first hint of evening crept through the blinds, Charles reached for his notebook, writing one neat line at the top of a fresh page. Account opened, pending reconciliation. The pen lingered a second longer before setting down. His eyes, calm and precise, lifted toward the window. Somewhere in the reflection, the faintest smile formed. The storm was no longer outside. It had moved in. Sunday morning light spilled through the wide glass walls of the downtown restaurant, catching in the bubbles of champagne and the metallic shine of utensils set too neatly. The place was designed to impress, the kind of brunch spot where image meant more than appetite. The table was crowded with laughter, camera flashes, and the familiar hum of people trying too hard to look happy. Charles sat at the far end, dressed as always, pressed shirt, dark slacks, and his brown blazer. It looked humble amid the sea of designer clothes, but he wore it like armor now. Olivia had invited him with genuine hope, wanting peace, wanting family. Travis, on the other hand, wanted a show. "All right, everyone," Travis announced, raising his voice as he adjusted his cufflinks. "Let's get a group photo. Something nice for the company's charity newsletter." The way he said charity, as if it were another accessory, made Charles's lips twitch. Olivia stood beside her father, smiling politely as Travis waved over the waiter to snap the shot. Then, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, Travis grinned and said, "Charles, try not to look like you wandered in from a bus stop this time." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel exactly, but it was comfortable. Too comfortable. Olivia's face reddened, her hand clenched around her glass. "Travis," she whispered sharply. "Enough." Charles's expression didn't change. He looked straight at Travis, then chuckled softly. "Funny," he said, the corners of his mouth lifting in a calm, unshaken smile. "How things change." The waiter clicked the picture. Travis, satisfied, turned to flag down another bottle of champagne. "Let's make it a proper brunch," he said, flashing the company card between his fingers like a magician showing his next trick. Charles's eyes caught it, the sleek black card with the embossed Paragon Systems logo. His mind, always attentive to detail, lingered on the motion of Travis's thumb as he handed it to the waiter. He could see the faint reflection of the numbers under the restaurant light, just enough to make out the final 4 digits. "Still expensing family fun?" Charles said quietly, just loud enough for Travis to hear. Travis smirked, pouring himself another drink. "Perks of running things, old man. Don't worry, I'll write it off under client relations." Olivia's eyes flicked toward her husband, disbelief and disgust mixing behind her forced smile. "You can't be serious," she whispered. "Relax," Travis said, brushing it off. "It's nothing." But Charles wasn't looking at Travis anymore. His gaze had shifted to the waiter, who disappeared toward the register with the card. Years of accounting instinct kicked in, pattern recognition, detail retention, the precision that had once made him indispensable. He reached for his water glass, covering the faintest smirk as he mentally repeated the digits he'd just seen. The brunch continued in that same uneasy rhythm. Laughter that didn't reach the eyes, compliments that sounded like negotiations. Olivia tried to hold the conversation together, but Charles spoke less and less. He let Travis talk about market shares, corporate growth, and strategic dominance, words meant to impress but hollow in their repetition. When the bill arrived, Travis barely looked at it. "Just run it on the same card," he said, waving his hand as if bills were beneath him. Charles took a long, slow sip of water, his reflection clear in the glass. There was a stillness about him now, not anger, not hurt, but calculation. The same calm he had when balancing a stubborn ledger, when finding the missing cent everyone else overlooked. "Excuse me," he said, rising from his chair. "Need to stretch my legs for a moment." Olivia glanced up, concerned. "You okay, Dad?" "Just fine," he replied with that familiar soft tone. "Numbers keep my head busy." He walked toward the front, passing by the register where the waiter was processing the card. For a second, he paused, casually, like a man tying his shoe, and confirmed what he'd already memorized. The digits were right. The signature line was unmistakable. Travis Reed. When he returned to the table, Travis was laughing again, completely unaware. The photo had already been posted online, another perfect image of family unity. But Charles looked different in that captured frame. His smile was smaller, knowing, his eyes sharper. As the group began to gather their coats, Travis clapped him on the back. "You should smile more." "Charles, life's too short to count pennies." Charles nodded once. "That's why I count character instead." Travis didn't catch the meaning. He rarely did. Outside, the sky had turned gray again. The wind carried a chill, brushing through Charles's hair as he buttoned his blazer. Across the street, a billboard for Paragon Systems gleamed in the drizzle, innovation with integrity. Charles stared at it for a long moment, a faint smirk forming. Then he turned toward home, repeating the 4 digits in his mind like coordinates on a map. The blueprint was there now. Not a plan born of rage, but of precision. Revenge, he thought, wasn't chaos. It was arithmetic. And for the first time since that humiliating dinner, the numbers were starting to add up. The nights had grown quieter at Charles's home. The hum of the city outside was faint, replaced by the soft tapping of his keyboard and the steady rhythm of rain against the window. His living room light burned late now, casting long shadows across the floor as rows of spreadsheets glowed on his laptop screen. Most men his age spent evenings with crossword puzzles or old movies. Charles preferred numbers. They told the truth without emotion. He sifted through Paragon Systems' public filings, the kind of documents most shareholders ignored, but that spoke volumes to anyone fluent in financial language. At first, everything looked immaculate, professionally audited, polished, correct. But then came the patterns. Small, recurring charges masked under ambiguous labels, network expenses, corporate hospitality, software integration. Each entry looked innocent alone. Together, they whispered something else. He leaned closer, scrolling through transaction dates and vendor codes, eyes narrowing behind his glasses. One column caught his attention, dining expenses listed as team-building initiatives. He clicked through. The same vendor name appeared again and again, the Azure Room. Charles's lips thinned. Of course. He reached for his file drawer and pulled out the restaurant receipt from his own humiliating dinner, folded neatly, preserved like evidence. He compared the date and merchant code with one from the filings, identical. For the next several nights, he followed the trail backward, from dinners to flights, from flights to conference accommodations, all tracing the same pattern, luxury masquerading as business necessity. The arrogance of it almost impressed him. Almost. He began a private ledger, carefully aligning each personal indulgence with its false justification. By the third night, he had a clear picture, tens of thousands misclassified and hidden. And if there was one thing Charles knew, it was that numbers always came due. His phone buzzed once, a message from Helen. "Call me when you're up." He did. Her voice came through calm, but edged with intrigue. "You were right. I cross-checked the same expense cluster. It's enough for corporate fraud if it's leaked right." Charles sat back, letting her words settle. He could almost hear the rain soften outside, as if waiting for his reply. "No leaks," he said finally. "Just lessons." Helen hesitated. "Charles, you're walking a fine line." "I've walked finer," he said, glancing at the neat rows of figures filling his screen. His tone wasn't vengeful, it was precise, as if balancing an equation that had been off for too long. When the call ended, he printed one page, a single receipt from the Azure Room, dated the night Travis mocked him, signed in thick ink, Travis Reed. Charles laid it beside his own dinner bill, the modest one he had paid quietly that same night. 2 pieces of paper, 2 signatures, one honest, one deceitful. He folded the receipt carefully and slipped it into his wallet, behind his own. The symbolism wasn't lost on him. Some debts, he thought, didn't need confrontation. They just needed record-keeping. The printer light blinked off. The rain outside slowed to a drizzle. Charles closed his laptop, his reflection faint in the dark screen. A quiet man surrounded by truth, waiting for the right moment to balance the account. The rain had eased that week, but the clouds still lingered, the kind that carried weight without sound. Charles sat by the window, reading a newspaper he wasn't truly reading when his phone vibrated across the table. Olivia's name lit the screen. He hesitated a moment before answering. "Dad," she began softly, her voice tentative, rehearsed. "Can we have dinner again? Please." Charles folded the paper, resting it beside his coffee. "Dinner?" "Yes," she said quickly. "At the Azure Room. Travis wants to make peace. So do I." There was a pause, the kind that carried the whole story between them. The humiliation, the silence, the months of awkward distance. Charles let it breathe, then asked gently, "Travis wants to make peace, or he wants an audience?" "Maybe both," she admitted. But Dad, it's just one evening. For me. For Noah. He exhaled slowly. All right, he said at last. For you. When the call ended, the quiet of the house returned. He looked out at the wet street, watching reflections ripple in the puddles. Peace wasn't what Travis wanted. Men like him didn't apologize. They performed reconciliation when it suited their image. But that was fine. Charles had learned long ago that truth didn't need to be loud. It just needed to be timed. Later that afternoon, his phone rang again. Helen. You got a minute? Always, he said, his tone calm, measured. I've been looking deeper into Paragon's filings, she said. Since you're a registered equity holder, you can access their internal audit reports. Legally. It's your right as a shareholder. He smiled faintly. Then I suppose I'll settle one final tab. Helen chuckled softly. You sound almost too calm for this. I'm an accountant, he replied. We settle calmly. After the call, he went to his closet. The brown blazer hung neatly beside his gray suit, the fabric still smelling faintly of rain and old memory. He lifted it gently, brushing his fingers along the worn sleeves. This time, he polished his shoes, straightened his cuffs, and buttoned the jacket with deliberate precision. When Noah came by to see him off, the boy stopped at the doorway, eyes wide. You look sharp, Grandpa. Charles smiled, adjusting his tie in the mirror. I aim for accuracy. Noah grinned, not fully understanding, but sensing something different in his grandfather, a quiet readiness. Olivia honked from outside, her reflection faint in the car window. As Charles stepped out, the evening light caught the faint glimmer in his glasses. The city looked the same, but everything about this night felt different. The first dinner had been humiliation. This one would be arithmetic. The drive was silent, except for the hum of tires on wet pavement. Olivia tried to make small talk, about Noah's grades, about a new art exhibit, but the words fell short. She sensed the weight behind her father's calm, the kind that didn't explode but calculated. When they reached the restaurant, Charles stepped out first. The glass facade gleamed under the streetlights, just as it had before. The same waiter was stationed at the entrance, smiling politely, not recognizing the storm, brewing beneath the surface of a quiet man in a brown blazer. Olivia reached for his arm. Dad, thank you for doing this. He placed his hand over hers, gentle but firm. For you, he said again. Inside, laughter and the clink of glass filled the air. Travis was already seated, phone in hand, checking something on the screen before he looked up with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Charles, he said, standing halfway, glad you could join us again. Charles smiled, polite and steady. Wouldn't miss it. They sat, the same table, the same view. But this time, the silence between them wasn't tension, it was control. Charles adjusted his glasses and let his eyes drift to the table setting, the receipt folder tucked neatly beside the silverware. Numbers had brought him here once before. Tonight, they would do so again, only this time by his terms. Outside, thunder rolled faintly over the bay, a sound like a reminder. Charles rested his hands calmly on the table. The ledger was nearly ready to close. The azure room shimmered, just as it had months before, the same polished marble, the same low jazz, murmuring beneath the clatter of glass and silver. For Charles, stepping through those glass doors again felt like stepping back into a battlefield disguised as civility. Same restaurant, same table. A perfect circle drawn in quiet irony. Travis stood first, his suit immaculate, his grin rehearsed. Charles, he said smoothly, we got our old spot again. I told them it was kind of a family tradition. Olivia smiled nervously, trying to bridge invisible fault lines. Let's just enjoy tonight, she said softly. Please. Charles nodded once, settling into his chair. Of course, tradition's important. The waiter approached, the same young man with careful manners and quick eyes. Recognition flickered across his face as he looked at Charles. "Back for another round, sir?" he asked, a polite grin tugging at his lips. Charles returned the smile. "Seems that way." Travis chuckled, swirling his wine glass before the waiter could fill it. "Let's hope he remembered his wallet this time," he said lightly, eyes gleaming with arrogance. The joke landed flat. Olivia's shoulders stiffened, her smile fading. Charles's tone was calm, effortless. "Don't worry," he said, sliding his menu aside. "I've got the right card this time." The words lingered like a quiet chord under the restaurant's music. Dinner unfolded with the same predictable pattern, Travis commanding attention, talking about his company's quarterly projections and market dominance. He ordered lavishly again, never glancing at the prices, steak for himself, halibut for Olivia, and wine imported from somewhere expensive enough to make a point. Charles, as before, ordered soup. He listened to Travis's monologue, his gaze steady but detached. Every boast, every smirk, was a repeated note in a song he already knew by heart. The arrogance no longer cut, it clarified. When the plates were cleared and dessert arrived, Travis leaned back, smugly satisfied. "You know, Charles," he said, tapping the rim of his glass, "I've been meaning to tell you, that blazer of yours, iconic, classic even." Olivia shot him a warning look. "Travis?" But Charles only smiled faintly. "Some things age well," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. The waiter returned then with the check folder, setting it between them. Charles reached for it first. "Allow me," he said, his tone so polite it disarmed everyone at the table. Travis laughed, waving a dismissive hand. "No, no, really, I insist." But Charles already had his wallet open. He removed a sleek black card, identical to the one Travis had once used at brunch. His movements were slow, deliberate, unremarkable to anyone watching. "Just the one from the company," he said lightly, eyes fixed on the folder as he placed the card inside. "After all, it's tradition now." The waiter, unaware of the significance, nodded. "Of course, sir." He disappeared toward the counter. Olivia frowned slightly. "Dad, what—" Charles reached for his water glass. "Nothing to worry about," he said, eyes calm. "Just keeping things balanced." Across the table, Travis was already onto another story, about a new investor, a conference, something loud and forgettable. He didn't notice the faint tremor of irony in the air, didn't notice the waiter returning with the receipt. "All taken care of," the waiter said cheerfully, placing the folder down. "Corporate account approved." Travis blinked. "Corporate?" But Charles was already folding his napkin neatly. "Guess I finally figured out how these modern expenses work." Travis laughed uncertainly, glancing at Olivia, but her expression had shifted, confusion laced with something else. Charles stood slowly, his voice soft but resonant. "You were right, Travis. Some dinners are worth the cost." The waiter thanked them as they left, holding the door open into the cool Seattle night. Charles paused under the awning, the city lights reflecting in his glasses. He didn't gloat, didn't smirk. He simply adjusted his collar, eyes glinting with quiet satisfaction, like a man who had just balanced the first line in a long-delayed equation. Behind him, thunder rolled far off over the water. A storm was coming. Dessert arrived under the soft, amber light of the azure room, glossy plates of tiramisu and brulee that looked more like artwork than food. The jazz band in the corner played low and slow, brushing through a rendition of Autumn Leaves. Everything about the scene felt composed, almost cinematic, except for the tension that lingered beneath the surface. Travis leaned back in his chair, a second glass of wine in hand, laughing louder than necessary. "You know," he said, eyeing Charles across the table, "maybe I judged your style too soon. That jacket's practically your signature now." Olivia shot him a look sharp enough to cut through glass, but Charles didn't flinch. He simply dabbed at his mouth with the napkin, calm and deliberate. "You might be right," he said evenly. "Some things are worth keeping." Travis chuckled, oblivious to the irony sitting across from him. "Well, You wear it with confidence. I respect that. He raised his glass in a mock toast. To vintage values. Charles lifted his water instead. To accurate records, he replied. The waiter approached quietly, a small leather folder in hand, his tone professional but polite. All set for you, Mr. Reed, he said. The bill's already been taken care of. Corporate account on file. Travis's grin faltered, the words landing like a dropped plate in the quiet room. Corporate. What? Yes, sir, the waiter said, nodding. Paragon Systems. Same card as last time. Everything processed successfully. Olivia blinked. Corporate? Travis, what's he talking about? Travis froze, his hand tightening around the wine glass. That can't be right. He looked at the waiter. There must be a mistake. I didn't... But the waiter had already stepped back with professional detachment, leaving the folder neatly closed on the table. The jazz continued, gentle and mocking in its calmness. Charles set down his napkin, folding it carefully with both hands. Guess I finally fit your expense report, he said softly. The words landed with surgical precision. No anger, no volume, just truth polished to a shine. Travis's face drained of color. His lips parted, but no sound came out. The faint reflection of the candlelight danced in his glass, shaking slightly in his hand. Olivia looked between them, realization slowly forming behind her eyes. Dad, she whispered, what did you... But Charles wasn't gloating. His expression remained still, patient, almost serene. He turned slightly toward the window, where rain streaked faintly down the glass, and said in that same quiet tone, It's remarkable how the right card finds the right account. Across the table, Noah pressed his lips together, trying not to laugh. His eyes darted between his grandfather and his father, reading the moment with youthful clarity. Even he understood. This wasn't about money. It was about balance. Travis finally spoke, his voice low, strained. Charles, what did you do? Just paid the bill, Charles said simply. Like I said I would. The silence that followed wasn't loud. It was dense, thick enough that the clink of a spoon from a nearby table felt intrusive. Olivia looked down at the tablecloth, her mind spinning, torn between shock and reluctant admiration. Travis set his glass down with a trembling hand. You think this is funny? Charles looked at him, not with spite, but with an unsettling calm. No, I think it's accurate. The waiter returned once more, setting down the receipt slip without a word. The printed text glowed faintly in the low light. At the bottom, Paragon Systems corporate account, approved. Below it, the signature, Travis Reed. Charles's gaze lingered on it for a moment before he stood, smoothing the front of his blazer. Enjoy your dessert, he said, voice soft, almost kind. It's already paid for. He adjusted his cuffs, nodded politely to the waiter, and began walking toward the exit. The soft jazz trailed after him like the soundtrack to a quiet reckoning. Travis didn't move. His eyes followed the door long after it closed, the reality of what had just happened settling slowly, painfully. Olivia exhaled, the first sound anyone had made in nearly a minute. Noah glanced at her, half smiling in awe, half afraid to breathe. The restaurant carried on, laughter from another table, a distant toast, the band easing into another song. But at that table, silence sat like an unwelcome guest, heavy and cold. And in that silence, the first real crack appeared in Travis Reed's confidence. The jazz played on, smooth and indifferent, the sound of balance returning to the room. Morning broke gray and heavy, the kind of Seattle light that never truly brightens the room. The rain was steady, washing down the windows of Travis and Olivia's glass-walled home. Inside, the mood was no less stormy. Travis paced the living room barefoot, his shirt half-buttoned, a phone pressed tight to his ear. Reverse that charge now, he barked, voice hoarse with panic. I don't care what the protocol says, just fix it. On the other end, his finance director stammered something about automated compliance systems and locked authorizations. Travis's face flushed red. Don't tell me it's flagged. Unflag it. It was a mistake, do you understand? He listened for a moment, then slammed the phone down on the marble counter. Idiots. From the hallway, Olivia appeared, holding a mug of coffee she hadn't touched. What's going on? She asked quietly. He didn't turn. Your father, he muttered, pacing again. He used my company card. That dinner last night, he did it on purpose. He's sabotaging me. Olivia blinked, stunned. Sabotaging you? You gave him the bill. Travis spun toward her. He stole it, Olivia. He must have taken it from brunch weeks ago. How else would he get my corporate card number? Now compliance has flagged it, and Helen Carter... He stopped mid-sentence, realization dawning in his eyes. Olivia's brow furrowed. Helen Carter? Dad's friend? Yes, Travis hissed, grabbing his phone again. And she's head auditor now. Perfect. Perfect. In her downtown office, Helen sat at her desk, the morning's drizzle streaking faintly down the high-rise glass. She scrolled through the audit portal, her fingers pausing on the Paragon Systems alert. Unauthorized corporate charge, the Azure Room, 1263. Signed, Travis Reed. She exhaled through her nose, calm but deliberate, and typed 3 words into the notes field. Personal misuse confirmed. By policy, that single notation triggered an automated alert, not just to the compliance team, but to Paragon's executive board. Within minutes, emails began to circulate quietly among directors. No one said anything yet, but the storm was building. Back at the house, Travis's phone buzzed again. He grabbed it, his expression darkening as he read the notification. Unbelievable, he whispered. It's already on the internal feed. The board's been notified. Olivia set her mug down carefully. Maybe you should just own it. Admit you used the wrong card. He cut her off sharply. Don't tell me how to manage my company, Olivia. You have no idea how these things work. Her tone dropped, cold and level. No, Travis. You have no idea how decency works. He turned on her then, eyes wide, voice rising. You think this is funny? Your father's making me look like a criminal. You did that yourself, she said, her voice like ice. He didn't make you use that card at brunch, or dinner, or all the other times you blurred the line. The words hit him harder than any argument could. For a long moment, he just stared at her, jaw clenched, nostrils flaring. Then he grabbed his coat, muttering, I'll fix this, and stormed out into the rain. The front door slammed, echoing through the modern, empty house. Olivia stood in the silence that followed, her reflection pale in the window glass. Outside, the storm thickened, streaks of water chasing each other down the pane. Across the city, in his quiet apartment, Charles sat at his desk, sipping tea. He hadn't checked his phone once that morning. He didn't need to. He knew how systems worked. Once truth entered the numbers, it had a way of moving on its own. On his table lay a neatly folded napkin, the one from last night's dinner. And beneath it, the receipt from the Azure Room, his own handwriting still crisp on the tip line. He smiled faintly, the sound of rain filling the room like a soft applause. He didn't need to say a word. The balance was shifting by itself now. Outside, the city pulsed with gray light. In one penthouse, chaos. In one small apartment, calm. And between them, the rain kept falling. Steady, relentless, washing the truth clean for everyone to see. The first email hit inboxes before sunrise. Its subject line was sterile, almost bureaucratic. Notice, CEO expense review pending compliance inquiry. But inside Paragon Systems' sleek headquarters, it detonated like a grenade. By 9 a.m., the memo had spread through every department, whispers rippling through cubicles, Slack messages pinging in private channels. Is it true? Did Travis really misuse company funds? Helen's team is involved. The official message from the compliance board read neatly, "Due to a flagged transaction involving the CEO's corporate account, an internal audit is being conducted to ensure transparency and integrity across executive financial practices." There was no accusation, just language polished enough to sound neutral and lethal enough to imply everything. At Paragon's top floor, Travis stood in his office, hands gripping the edge of his desk. Below him, the city shimmered in dull gray light, its skyline blurred by rain. He'd read the memo 3 times already, each time feeling the blood rise higher in his neck. "Who leaked it?" he demanded to the empty room. "Who the hell leaked it?" But there was no one to answer, only the faint ping of another email, this time from his head of communications, suggesting they prepare a transparency statement. He slammed the laptop shut. "Transparency," he muttered bitterly. "That's what they call betrayal now." Down the hall, the boardroom filled quietly with tension. Partners who once clinked glasses with Travis now exchanged wary glances. No one said it aloud, but everyone was calculating the same thing: distance. Helen watched the chaos unfold from her own office. Not gloating, not smug, just steady. Numbers had spoken. She'd only recorded them. When the call came in from the board's legal team requesting shareholder verification, she knew exactly who they'd be contacting next. Her phone rang again, this time displaying a familiar name, Charles Bennett. "Morning, Helen," came his calm, unhurried voice. "Charles, you've seen the email?" "I have," he said, setting his teacup down. "Quite the headline." She hesitated. "You're listed as a minor equity holder, 2.5%, still active. The bylaws give you voting access in emergency sessions. You realize what that means?" Charles leaned back, the sound of rain tapping softly against the window behind him. "That I finally get invited to one of their fancy meetings?" "More than that," she said quietly. "You're the swing vote." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then came the softest laugh. Not cruel, not gleeful, but almost weary. "Then I'll swing it politely." Helen smiled despite herself. "You're enjoying this a little." "I'm just balancing things, Helen, that's all." Across town, Olivia sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through the same memo on her phone. The words blurred as she read them again. CEO expenses under review. The man she'd built her life around was unraveling, and her father, the man he mocked, now had the quiet power to tip the scales. When Travis stormed in, she didn't look up. "So, it's official?" she asked. He didn't answer. He was on his phone again, voice clipped, ordering PR drafts, damage control, legal reviews. She watched him, recognizing something she hadn't before: desperation. "Stop," she said finally. "What?" "Stop pretending this is everyone else's fault." He turned, incredulous. "You think I did this to myself?" Her voice was low, steady. "You used the card, Travis. You used it for dinners, gifts, whatever looked good in the moment. You thought the rules didn't apply to you." He shook his head, laughing under his breath. "You sound like him, like your father." She met his gaze. "Maybe for once I should have." Outside, thunder cracked, sudden and sharp. At that same moment, in a quiet apartment across the city, Charles refreshed his email. A new message from Paragon's board appeared. "Emergency shareholder session scheduled, 7 p.m. Beneath it, a line in bold: "Voting rights confirmed. Charles Bennett, Equity ID, CN2274. He read it twice, then folded his glasses, setting them beside the envelope that held the dinner receipts. The rain had grown louder, hammering the window like applause that refused to end. The city beyond was gray and trembling, mirrors of glass and storm. He poured himself another cup of tea, steady hand, calm breath. He didn't need revenge to be loud. It just needed to be accurate. And by nightfall, accuracy would speak for itself. The boxes were stacked neatly by the door, taped and labeled in Olivia's careful handwriting. Rain streaked the small front window of Charles's house, casting shifting patterns on the hardwood floor. It wasn't how she'd imagined moving back home, not at 34, not with her son asleep upstairs. But the silence here felt cleaner than the noise she'd left behind. Charles stood beside the doorway, quietly watching her fold the last of her coats into the hall closet. "You don't have to explain anything," he said softly. "I know," she replied, her voice tired but calm. "I just couldn't stay there anymore." The there hung between them. Travis's penthouse, his cold glass and chrome world filled with brand names and damage control. Since the board email, he'd been on every screen, spinning narratives, demanding interviews, scrambling to shape perception. "These allegations are the result of misinformation," he said in one broadcast, his tone forced and rehearsed. "My father-in-law misunderstood a corporate procedure. I hold no ill will. He's an elderly man set in his ways." On social media, the phrasing morphed within hours into a cruel headline: "Tech CEO blames elder jealousy for audit controversy." It spread like oil on water. At Charles's kitchen table, Olivia watched it unfold on her phone, jaw tight. "He really said that?" Charles stirred his tea. "He did." "He's calling you jealous?" He smiled faintly, not with amusement, but with something closer to pity. People under audit don't think clearly. They start rearranging words the way guilty men rearrange numbers. Outside, thunder rolled faintly over the sound. By the next morning, Helen Carter's name appeared in the news, not as a rumor, not as gossip, but as authority. Paragon's internal audit summary was released, clean and clinical in tone. "All financial activity related to Mr. Charles Bennett has been verified as personal and legitimate. The flagged transactions pertain solely to executive misuse of company resources." One statement, one paragraph. And suddenly, public sympathy shifted. The online threads changed overnight. So the old guy was right. Imagine mocking your father-in-law and getting caught by his receipts. Memes that once ridiculed Charles were now framed as poetic justice. Budget Grandpa had become the honest accountant. In his modest living room, Charles barely looked at the coverage. He sat at the table with Noah, helping him with a math worksheet. "Decimals are tricky," he said, guiding the boy's pencil, "but they always tell the truth if you line them up correctly." Noah looked up, smiling. "Like people should?" Charles's smile deepened just slightly. "Exactly." Upstairs, Olivia unpacked boxes, her phone buzzing again. Travis. She ignored the first two calls, but on the third, she sighed and answered. "Liv, listen to me," came his voice, urgent, defensive. "You can't believe everything you see online. This is a witch hunt. Your father's trying to ruin me." "Travis," she cut in, voice sharp now, "you did that yourself." There was silence, then a bitter laugh. "You've turned against me too, huh?" "I'm just seeing clearly," she said, for the first time in years. Downstairs, Charles could hear faint fragments of the conversation. He didn't move until the phone clicked off. Then he stood, walked to the side table, and picked up his own phone. When Travis answered, his tone was clipped, defensive. "If this is about the press, Charles..." "It's about balance," Charles interrupted quietly. "You built your empire on quicksand, and now it's settling." Travis's breath caught, just audible over the line. "You think you've won?" Charles's tone was calm, almost kind. "Winning implies competition. I just prefer accuracy." There was a long silence before the call ended. Charles set the phone down gently, the rain beginning again outside, steady, patient, cleansing. Upstairs, Olivia peeked down from the landing, watching her father as he returned to the table, his hands folding neatly over the newspaper. He looked peaceful, not triumphant. But in the faint reflection of the window, his eyes were sharp, focused. The storm outside wasn't done yet. Neither was he. The Paragon Systems board meeting began precisely at 7 p.m. Though the word meeting didn't capture the tension pulsing through that conference room. The rain outside the glass tower beat steadily against the windows, Seattle's skyline a blur of gray and neon reflection. Around the long black table, directors sat with tight faces and open laptops. A large monitor at the far end flickered to life, connecting the remote attendees. Among them, one name appeared quietly at the bottom corner, Charles Bennett, shareholder. The moment his camera turned on, the contrast was startling. The others looked sharp, corporate, draped in tailored suits and tension. Charles appeared in his small living room, a bookshelf behind him, soft lamplight reflecting off his glasses. The brown blazer, freshly pressed, was his only armor. Helen Carter sat near the front of the room, hands steady on her binder. "Let's begin," she said, her voice professional but edged with resolve. "As head auditor, I've compiled the findings requested by the Compliance Division and verified by 2 external firms." Travis sat across from her, his jaw clenched. "We don't need a performance," he muttered. Helen ignored him. She pressed a key, and the screen behind her filled with spreadsheets, clean, color-coded, impossible to argue with. "Over the past 24 months, we've tracked roughly $400,000 in misclassified expenses. Personal spending coded under business categories: flights, gifts, dining, entertainment." Travis slammed his palm on the table. "This is a smear job. You're twisting context." Helen's tone didn't shift. "We cross-checked each entry with corporate policy and company card statements. Every one of these was signed. By you." Travis turned toward the board, voice cracking under pressure. "You all know me. You've seen what I've built here. You think I'd risk everything for dinners and hotels?" From the screen, Charles's calm voice cut through the noise. "People risk everything for less. Sometimes just to be seen." Travis's eyes snapped to the monitor. "You," he hissed. "You orchestrated this." Charles tilted his head slightly. "No, you orchestrated it. I just did the math." A murmur swept the room. Someone near the end of the table whispered, "The math doesn't lie." Helen clicked to the final slide, a clean summary of totals, dates, and audit signatures. "In accordance with company bylaws," she said, "we must now vote on whether to suspend Mr. Reed pending further investigation." The boardroom fell into a heavy silence. Travis looked around desperately, searching for support, but eyes dropped away one by one. The air was thick with the quiet shame of association. Charles didn't move, didn't blink. His small window on the screen remained still as the votes came in, green icons appearing one after another. Finally, Helen pressed the last key. "The motion passes," she announced, effective immediately. "Mr. Reed is suspended from all executive duties pending full review." For a long moment, no one spoke. The rain outside filled the silence. Travis pushed back his chair, the sound sharp and grating. "You think this ends me?" he snapped. "You think you've won?" Charles's tone was steady, deliberate. "This isn't about winning, Travis. It's about balance, overdue." The call ended moments later. The screen went black, leaving only Charles's reflection in the laptop's faint glow. He closed the lid softly, exhaling through his nose, neither triumphant nor sad, just complete. Later that night, Olivia found him sitting at the kitchen table, a mug of tea cooling beside his hand. She studied his face, calm, unreadable. "You didn't even celebrate," she said quietly. Charles gave a small smile. "Revenge isn't yelling, sweetheart. It's math." Outside, the storm pressed against the windows again, steady and rhythmic. But this time, the sound didn't carry tension. It carried balance, the kind that follows when truth has finally been accounted for. The first headline appeared online just after dawn, splashed across local news feeds in bold, irresistible type. "Tech CEO under audit. Family dinner tip-off exposes Paragon scandal. By noon, it had gone national. Within hours, social media was ablaze with commentary, some mocking, most fascinated. Seattle's corporate soap opera, one post called it. The story had everything Americans loved to dissect: wealth, arrogance, betrayal, and poetic justice served at a dinner table. The photo that accompanied most articles showed Travis in his glass office, looking pale and cornered. Right below it, someone had uploaded the infamous family photo, the one from brunch months earlier, but now the caption read differently. The internet had rewritten the joke. Budget grandpa? No, balanced grandpa. Accountant 1, CEO 0. Never mock a man who knows spreadsheets. Within 2 days, Charles Bennett had become an online folk hero. Talk shows joked about the Ledger legend. Morning radio hosts replayed the story with laughter and awe. Imagine, one of them said, you try to embarrass your father-in-law, and he audits your life instead. But while the noise outside swelled, Charles remained untouched by it. He didn't grant interviews. He didn't watch the coverage. His phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters, podcast hosts, even financial bloggers asking for comment, but he silenced them all. Fame, he thought, was just another column, flashy, unstable, short-term gain. He had no interest in collecting it. Instead, he spent his mornings in the backyard, sleeves rolled up, knees in the soil. The spring air smelled of wet earth and tomato vines. Noah knelt beside him, hands dirty, eyes bright. Grandpa, the boy said, dropping a handful of seeds into the soil, you really showed him. Charles pressed the dirt gently over the seeds, his movements slow, deliberate. No, he said after a moment. He showed himself. Noah tilted his head, curious. What do you mean? Charles brushed the soil from his fingers and sat back on his heels. People who build on pride always think they're standing on stone, he said softly. But it's sand. All it takes is one good rain to show what's underneath. The boy nodded, though his young mind didn't yet grasp the full weight of the metaphor. He just smiled and kept planting. From the kitchen window, Olivia watched them, father and son, working side by side. The past few weeks had been chaos. Lawyers, statements, her husband's name plastered across every financial network in the country. But this scene, quiet, ordinary, gentle, steadied her. She pressed a hand to her mouth, holding back the emotion that rose unexpectedly. He doesn't even care, she whispered to herself. He just lets the truth do the talking. Later that afternoon, she joined them outside with lemonade. Charles sat back in a wooden chair, his face lined with fatigue but also peace. The sun slipped through the clouds, catching in the rim of his glasses. Olivia handed him a glass. You could be on TV right now, she said, half smiling. They're calling you the most ethical man in America. He chuckled, shaking his head. That's not a title I need. Titles fade faster than headlines. She sat beside him, quiet for a moment. Do you ever feel bad for him? For Travis? Charles stared out at the small garden. Rows of soil, neat and simple, the opposite of everything Travis's world had been. Pity and forgiveness, he said softly, aren't the same thing, but both take time. Olivia's eyes glistened. You always make it sound so easy. It's not, he replied. It's just necessary. A breeze moved through the yard, bending the tomato plants just enough to shimmer in the light. The sound of distant thunder rolled through the clouds, not menacing, just lingering, like a reminder that storms leave clarity behind. Charles stood slowly, stretching his back. Help me cover the rows before the rain comes. As they worked in silence, Noah's laughter broke through the air, light, unguarded, healing. Olivia smiled through quiet tears, the kind born from relief more than sorrow. By evening, the first drops began to fall again, steady and rhythmic against the garden tarp. Charles watched the water roll down the leaves, sinking into the earth he'd turned. Vindication, he thought, didn't need noise. It only needed truth and time to take root. He picked up his gloves, looking once more toward the horizon where dark clouds drifted slowly east. The media storm was still raging beyond the fences, but here, in the quiet pulse of his backyard, the balance had already returned. The rain hadn't stopped in 3 days. It was the kind of relentless drizzle that softened edges and blurred reflections, fitting weather for a fall from grace. On every business channel, the same headline scrolled in quiet repetition. Travis Reed resigns from Paragon Systems amid ongoing audit. The articles were sterile, factual, but the undertone was unmistakable. His resignation wasn't a decision, it was an inevitability. The board had forced his hand, stripping his remaining authority, freezing his executive privileges, and announcing his departure, effective immediately. His stock options, once worth millions, were clawed back as part of the settlement. Charles watched the broadcast in silence from his living room. The glow of the television flickered across his face, but his expression was unreadable. This wasn't triumph, it was arithmetic coming full circle. Olivia entered quietly, setting a mug of coffee beside him. "It's official," she said softly. He nodded, eyes still on the screen. "Yes." Balance sheet closed. Her phone buzzed on the table. Once, twice, then again. She picked it up, glanced at the screen, and sighed. "It's him." Charles looked at her, the faintest arch in his brow. "Travis?" She nodded. He sent 5 messages already. Apologies, explanations, excuses. She handed him the phone for a moment, and he read the top line. "Olivia, please, you don't understand what your father did to me." Charles passed it back gently. "You don't need to reply." "I wasn't planning to," she said, locking the phone and setting it aside. Her voice was calm, but her shoulders carried months of exhaustion. "He's only sorry he lost." Charles leaned back in his chair, the creak of the old wood steady and grounding. "Loss has a way of clarifying character," he said quietly. Later that afternoon, he sat at his small desk by the window, papers neatly organized before him. Among them lay the Paragon Systems equity document, the same one he'd rediscovered months earlier, the spark that had begun all this. The ink at the bottom bore his signature, 2.5% ownership, modest but meaningful. He pulled a new envelope from the drawer, writing Noah's name in careful script. Inside, he placed the share transfer form and a single note. When Olivia entered, he slid the envelope toward her. "For Noah," he said. She looked down, confused. "Dad, this is his now," he said simply. "Invest early, withdraw late. That's how value grows." Her eyes softened. "You're teaching him about money?" "About patience," he replied. "Money just happens to be a clearer metaphor." As he spoke, the phone rang. Helen. He answered with a tone lighter than usual. "Helen, I assume you've seen the announcement?" "I have," she said. Her voice carried the fatigue of long hours and quiet satisfaction. "You did it, Charles. You actually did it." He smiled faintly. "No, the numbers did." She chuckled softly, then paused. You could have taken it further. Pressed charges. Bankrupted him." Charles looked out the window at the drizzle streaking down the glass. The city softened beyond it. "That's not the lesson," he said quietly. He already lost what matters most, his credibility. Helen sighed. "You're still too gracious." "Graciousness," he said, "isn't for him. It's for me." They spoke for a few more minutes about the formalities, audit closure, compliance reports, sealing the case. When he hung up, the house was silent again, except for the steady hum of rain. Charles opened the final file on his desk. Audit resolution, Paragon Systems, completed. He signed his name neatly at the bottom and clicked Submit. The digital notification chimed once, confirming what he already knew. The numbers were balanced. The equation, at last, made sense. He closed the laptop and leaned back, letting the quiet fill the room. Outside, the rain softened to a mist, and a faint glow broke through the clouds. Olivia appeared in the doorway, arms crossed gently, her face at peace for the first time in months. "It's over," she said. Charles gave a small nod. No storms last forever. But as he looked out at the city, the skyline washed clean, reflective, there was something in his gaze that suggested he knew this wasn't just an ending. It was a transition. The balance restored, but the next ledger already waiting to be written. The studio lights were softer than Charles expected. Not harsh, not interrogating, just warm enough to feel honest. He sat in front of a large microphone, its red recording light blinking gently, a quiet heartbeat in the dim room. Beyond the glass, the host smiled, adjusting her headset. "All right, Mr. Bennett," she said, her voice professional but kind. "You ready?" Charles nodded once, hands folded neatly in his lap. "As ready as I'll ever be." The intro music faded. The Seattle Morning Ledger show began its segment, the familiar jingle soft and rhythmic. "Today," the host announced, "we're joined by a man who's been called everything from the ethical accountant to the quiet storm behind Seattle's biggest corporate shakeup. Charles Bennett, thank you for being here." Charles smiled politely. "Thank you for having me." "You've become something of a symbol these past few weeks," she continued. "A retired accountant, a father, and, depending on who you ask, the reason a major tech CEO stepped down. I have to ask, Mr. Bennett, did you mean to expose him?" The studio fell into stillness. Even through the glass, the producer paused mid-note. Charles looked at the mic, then past it, as if seeing something only memory could project. A dinner table, a cruel joke, a receipt folded carefully into his wallet. His answer came measured, calm, deliberate. "No," he said softly. "I didn't mean to expose anyone. I meant to pay a debt, in full." The words landed like quiet thunder. The host leaned forward slightly. "A debt?" "Yes," he continued. "When someone mocks you, it's not always personal. Sometimes it's just carelessness, arrogance without awareness. But when that arrogance harms others, even silently, it adds up. And I've spent my life balancing what adds up." The microphone caught every breath, every syllable weighted with calm precision. "So you weren't motivated by revenge?" she asked. "Revenge," Charles said with a faint smile, "is an emotional expense, too costly. I prefer balance. I wanted to settle what was due, no more, no less." Across town, Olivia sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea, the radio playing softly beside her. Noah was at school. The house was still, but her father's voice filled the space with a quiet gravity that made her close her eyes and listen harder. The host's tone softened. "You've become something of a folk hero online. Memes, editorials, even t-shirts. People are calling you a lesson in dignity." Charles shook his head slightly. "Dignity isn't taught," he said. "It's maintained. You either keep it or you trade it for noise." The host smiled, visibly moved. "That's beautifully put." Charles shrugged lightly. "It's just true. The louder a man becomes, the less he hears." In a downtown apartment, the same voice drifted through a flat-screen TV. Travis stood in the center of his half-empty living room, hair unkempt, sleeves rolled up, eyes hollow. The radio clip played on the local news feed, Charles's tone echoing through the silence he'd once filled with power. "I didn't mean to expose anyone," came the repeated line. "I meant to pay a debt, in full." Travis turned away, pressing his hands over his face. His reflection in the window, tired, broken, looked nothing like the man who once ruled every boardroom he entered. Shame isn't loud, he realized. It's quiet, and it lingers. Back in the studio, the host asked her final question. Mr. Bennett, if you could speak directly to those listening, those who've been wronged but can't find peace, what would you tell them? Charles thought for a moment, the red light still blinking steadily. Be patient, he said. Truth takes its time, but it always shows its work. The host smiled, eyes glassy. That might be the best answer we've ever gotten. When the recording ended, the producer signaled a thumbs up. The red light faded. Charles exhaled quietly and stood, shaking hands with the host. Thank you, she said sincerely. He nodded. Just doing what I've always done, keeping the books honest. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet pavement and renewal. As he stepped into the light, Charles buttoned his brown blazer, walking slowly toward the parking lot. Unaware that the broadcast was already spreading across the city, played, shared, admired. Olivia smiled through quiet tears when the segment replayed on her phone later that evening. Noah's small voice broke the silence. He sounds like a superhero. She laughed softly. He is. Just the quiet kind. And somewhere, in a high-rise apartment washed in regret, Travis turned off the radio and sat in the dark, the sound of Charles's calm voice still echoing in his head. The kind of voice that doesn't haunt out of anger, but truth. The letter arrived on a gray Tuesday morning. No return address, just Charles's name, written in a tense, unfamiliar hand. The envelope was heavy, the kind that carried formality. He slid it open with his pocket knife, careful not to tear what was inside. A single cashier's check slid out, crisp and sterile, for $10,000. Siebars. Beneath it, a note scrawled in rushed ink. For what I owe. Charles studied the handwriting for a long moment. It wasn't guilt he read in those uneven lines. It was fatigue, the ink of a man trying to buy peace after exhausting every other form of currency. He set the check on the table, the number catching the morning light like an accusation. Outside, the rain tapped softly against the kitchen window, the world around him quiet. Charles walked to his desk, opened the top drawer, and pulled out a piece of stationery. He didn't hesitate, didn't pause for effect. In the same measured penmanship he used for his ledgers, he wrote 3 words, account closed. He slipped the note back into the same envelope, folded the check inside, sealed it, and placed it at the edge of his desk. Neat, centered, final. Later that afternoon, Olivia stopped by. She was quieter now, more composed than she had been in weeks. Her face carried the kind of calm that only comes after making a hard decision. She stood in the doorway, holding a stack of papers. Dad, she said softly, I filed. Charles turned from his desk. For separation? She nodded. It's time. He studied her for a moment, the steadiness in her posture, the sadness in her eyes. Are you certain? I am, she said. Travis sent you something, didn't he? Charles gave a small nod. He tried to settle an account that isn't measured in money. Olivia looked down, tears pooling quietly before she wiped them away. He doesn't understand. He never will. Charles reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. Some men mistake payment for penance. She managed a small, bittersweet smile. And some men mistake silence for weakness. The room was still for a moment, save for the faint ticking of the wall clock. Then from the hallway, Noah's voice called out, Mom? He appeared at the doorway, holding his backpack, eyes curious but cautious. You okay? Olivia knelt beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. I'm okay, she said softly. He looked at her, then at his grandfather. Grandpa fixed what we couldn't, didn't he? Charles smiled faintly. I just balanced it, Noah, that's all. Olivia looked at her father, understanding the truth beneath the words, that what he'd balanced wasn't just a financial ledger, but years of pride, pain, and imbalance that had shadowed their family. A knock interrupted the quiet. Charles opened the door to find Helen standing there, raincoat damp from the drizzle, a small paper bag in her hand. "Brought you some scones," she said with a warm grin. "Bribery," he said lightly. "You auditors never stop." She laughed, stepping inside. "I read the article about the interview. You handled yourself beautifully." He waved it off. "The truth doesn't need rehearsal." Her gaze fell to the envelope on his desk. "Is that what I think it is?" Charles nodded. "It's already going back. Some debts don't need collectors." Helen smiled softly. "You've got a rare kind of peace, Charles. The earned kind." He didn't answer right away. He just looked out through the rain-streaked glass, where the world seemed to glisten, washed but not erased. "Peace," he said finally, "isn't something you find. It's something you balance." Helen watched him as he slipped the sealed envelope into the outgoing mail tray. One final motion of closure. The check would make its way back to Travis soon, unopened, untouched, unanswered. Outside, the rain lightened to a mist, and the clouds parted enough for a thin ray of sunlight to break through, touching the wet pavement like a quiet benediction. Charles exhaled, his reflection faint in the window, steady and certain. The account, in every sense, was closed. It began quietly, like most of Charles's decisions did, not with fanfare, not with press releases, but with a simple handwritten note on his desk: The Balance Project. The name came to him while watching the evening news. His face appeared on screen again, framed by a headline that made him wince. From humiliation to hero. How one man's revenge became a corporate reckoning. He didn't like the word revenge. It cheapened the truth. Still, he understood that stories needed titles, and if that one got people's attention, maybe he could use it for something better, something lasting. So the next morning, he called Helen. "I want to start something," he said, his tone steady but thoughtful. "Something practical, not charity, education." Helen smiled through the phone. "Education in what?" "In fairness," he said, "in numbers, in how not to be fooled by them." Within weeks, the idea took form. The Balance Project would offer free financial literacy workshops, budgeting, saving, ethics in business, all taught by retired accountants, teachers, and community mentors. The goal was simple: to help people understand money before money misunderstood them. The media loved it. Seattle Chronicle ran a front-page piece titled "Revenge Turned Redemption, the Accountant Who Balanced More Than Books." Other outlets followed suit. Photos of Charles in his brown blazer, standing before a classroom whiteboard, filled timelines. But for Charles, the attention wasn't the reward, it was the opportunity. "If people are listening," he told Helen as they sat in her office one afternoon, surrounded by stacks of incorporation documents, "we might as well teach them something useful." Helen handled the legal filings herself, ensuring the nonprofit met every compliance standard. "This project," she said, glancing at him over her glasses, "will outlive the scandal." "That's the point," Charles replied. When the first session launched, the room was modest, a converted church basement with folding chairs and a donated projector. Yet every seat was filled. Single parents, young professionals, retirees, even a few Paragon employees quietly attending without name tags. Olivia managed registration and refreshments, her calm efficiency returning with every passing week. Noah sat at a corner table with his laptop, designing flyers and a clean blue and gray logo. Two hands balancing a scale formed from a check mark. When he showed it to his grandfather, Charles smiled. "You designed this?" "Yeah," Noah said proudly. "Mom helped me pick the colors." Charles nodded, his eyes glinting. "Our family finally shares a ledger again." That night, as they cleaned up after the session, Charles lingered near the back of the room, watching the volunteers stack chairs and wipe tables. Olivia caught his gaze and walked over, resting a hand on his arm. "You did something good, Dad. Something that feels bigger than all of it." He looked around at the laughter and small talk filling the once quiet space. "It's balance," he said simply. "Not payback, just correction." Meanwhile, the world outside kept spinning. Paragon Systems appointed a new CEO, a quiet, analytical woman who had once worked under Helen. Under her leadership, the company began rebuilding its reputation. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The empire Travis had tainted was now steadied by the very people he once dismissed. Articles shifted tone, from scandal to recovery. Some even credited Charles indirectly for the company's cultural course correction, but he never commented. He was finished with microphones. In the months that followed, the Balance Project expanded, first across Seattle, then to other Washington towns. Donations trickled in, small but steady, enough to keep classes running. For Charles, that was wealth, not in accounts, but in effect. One evening, after the last session of the month, Helen stopped by with coffee and a wry smile. "You realize," she said, "you've become the city's most trusted man with a calculator." Charles chuckled softly. "Trust," he said, looking out the window at the glowing streetlights, "is the only currency that doesn't devalue." The rain started again outside, a soft patter, steady, cleansing. In that sound, there was no chaos left, just rhythm, order. Charles sat back, the ledger of his life finally even. But his eyes, thoughtful as ever, hinted that the story wasn't over. Balance, after all, must always be maintained. The elevators at Paragon Systems opened with their familiar soft chime, but this time, the sound felt hollow. Travis stepped out, his reflection flashing briefly in the glass walls of the corridor before fading into shadow. The office was quieter than he remembered. No chatter, no greetings, no energy of subordinates eager to impress. Just silence, humming with memory. He walked past the reception desk, where the young assistant barely met his eyes. His badge no longer worked on the scanner. Security had to buzz him in. The humiliation was silent, procedural, the kind that didn't make headlines but lingered long after. His office door was half open. Inside, the view of the Seattle skyline still shimmered through the rain-streaked windows, the same view he once believed he owned. But the space had changed. The shelves were bare. The desk empty, except for one thing. A folder. It sat perfectly centered, aligned with the edge of the desk as if placed there with the precision of an accountant's ruler. Travis frowned, stepping closer. The cover was plain, beige, and on the front, written in clean handwriting, 2 words. Integrity account, settled. He froze, fingers hovering above it. He knew that handwriting. Charles Bennett. He opened the folder slowly. Inside were copies, audit summaries, expense reports, and his own signed receipts, each one marked with a red, closed stamp. On the final page, neatly tucked into the back sleeve, was a photograph. It was from that first dinner, the Azure Room, the night the humiliation began. In the picture, Charles sat in his old brown blazer, looking directly at the camera, half smiling. The image wasn't mocking. It wasn't angry. It was still, calm, unshaken, as if frozen in quiet truth. Travis sank into his chair, the leather cold against his back. For the first time, he looked around his office, not at the furniture, but at the absence of it. The awards removed, the bookshelves stripped bare. His reflection stared back at him from the black glass of the window, pale, worn, smaller somehow. For years, he'd built this empire on volume, on confidence that never needed to be right, just louder than doubt. But now, silence carried more power than his voice ever had. His hand hovered over the folder again. The words, integrity account. Settled stared back like a verdict, and he understood. This wasn't revenge. This was accounting, moral, exact, irrefutable. A knock on the glass startled him. The door opened slightly, and a woman stepped in, a paralegal, holding a white envelope. "Mr. Reed?" she asked cautiously. He turned, voice dry. "Yes?" She placed the envelope on the desk. From Olivia Bennett, delivered by her attorney. He didn't have to open it. He knew what it was. Divorce papers. The room seemed to shrink around him. The rain outside intensified, streaking the windows in silver lines that blurred the skyline. He tore the envelope open anyway, scanning the formal language, the date, the signatures. There it was, her name beside his, with a line between them like a closing ledger. He reached for a pen and signed without hesitation. The ink bled slightly into the paper, trembling under his hand. When he finished, he set the pen down gently, staring at what was left. The sound of rain filled the silence again. He looked back toward the folder, still open, the photograph visible beneath the fluorescent light. Charles's calm expression seemed to watch him from the page, not triumphant, not cruel, just unmovable. Travis leaned back, exhaling slowly. The realization came not as an epiphany, but as a quiet descent. Dignity wasn't loud. It didn't demand attention or applause. It just was. And that was what he'd never understood. Until now. He stood, picked up the folder, and placed it back exactly where he'd found it, centered, squared, untouched. Then he took one last look at the office, the empire of glass and ego, and walked out without turning off the lights. Across town, Charles sat by his window, reading quietly as the same rain whispered against the glass. The afternoon light caught in his glasses, illuminating the faintest smile on his face. Beside him, a cup of tea steamed gently, and an open book rested on his lap. The television in the background murmured about Paragon's restructuring, about new leadership and a return to integrity. But Charles didn't listen. The news no longer mattered. He turned a page slowly, eyes steady, posture composed, the image of peace earned, not inherited. And somewhere in the reflection of the glass, his calm mirrored Travis's silence. Two men in different rooms, finally understanding the same truth, that dignity, once lost, can't be reclaimed through power, only through acceptance. The auditorium was modest, but full. Rows of folding chairs filled with townspeople, reporters, and local officials, all gathered under a banner that read, "The Balance Project, Launch Event." The air carried that rare mixture of ceremony and sincerity, a quiet reverence for something real. Charles stood backstage, straightening the lapels of his brown blazer, the same one that had once been mocked, now pressed and polished. It had become his quiet armor, not for pride, but for continuity. He glanced at the crowd through the curtain and saw familiar faces. Helen seated near the front, Olivia beside Noah, both smiling softly, their eyes full of pride. The event coordinator leaned in. "Mr. Bennett, you're up." He nodded. His steps to the podium were slow but sure, every footfall measured like the careful line of a ledger. As he reached the stage, the room rose in gentle applause. He waited for it to fade before speaking, letting the quiet settle around him. "Good evening," he began, his voice calm, steady, intimate. "I've spent most of my life adding numbers. But what I've learned is that life's real equations don't live in spreadsheets. They live in people." The crowd listened closely, no fidgeting, no murmurs. "When we lose sight of integrity," he continued, "it's not immediate. It doesn't collapse overnight. It fades slowly, hidden under excuses, justified by success, disguised as ambition." He paused, the weight of experience filling the silence. "And before you know it, the balance sheet of your life doesn't add up anymore." His gaze softened. "Money's loud," he said finally. "Integrity whispers." The words hung in the air like something sacred. He let them linger. The audience was still, almost afraid to breathe. Olivia felt her throat tighten, eyes glistening. Noah, sitting beside her, mouthed the line under his breath as if memorizing it. Helen leaned forward slightly. Hands clasped, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Proud, knowing. Charles looked down at the podium briefly, then back up. This project isn't about revenge, he said. It's about restoration. It's about remembering that dignity has value, even when the world forgets how to price it. He gestured subtly to the volunteers seated along the aisle, retirees, teachers, accountants, and young students. These are the people who keep their receipts, not just of money, but of character, because every community needs a ledger that stays honest. He ended simply with gratitude. Thank you for letting me be part of that balance. For a heartbeat, there was silence, and then the room erupted into applause. It wasn't the polite kind that fills space. It was genuine, rising like a wave. People stood, clapping, some whistling, others simply nodding through tears. Olivia stood too, her hands trembling slightly as she clapped. Noah's grin was wide and unguarded, his small hands clapping until they turned pink. "That's my grandpa," he shouted proudly. Helen joined the applause, wiping at her eyes discreetly. She had seen many speeches in her career, none this quiet, none this true. But somewhere near the back of the hall, away from the spotlight, a man sat in the last row, dressed simply, head low, Travis Reed. His face was thinner now, his expression sober, contemplative. As the crowd stood, he remained seated at first, eyes fixed on the man at the podium, the man he once mocked, underestimated, tried to outshine. When the applause softened, Travis lifted his hands slowly and clapped once, just once, a single, quiet gesture of acknowledgement. No one noticed him, no cameras caught it. But it was there, the sound of a man accepting truth. Charles glanced briefly toward the back of the room, his eyes narrowing as if sensing something. An echo, maybe. He didn't search for its source. He didn't need to. He simply smiled, the kind that closes circles. As the applause continued, the camera of imagination pulled back. The stage, the banner, the family reunited in light. Balance restored, quietly. The months that followed Paragon's upheaval were quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm has passed, but still leaves puddles in the streets. The world moved on, as it always does. Headlines faded. New scandals took their place. But for Travis Reed, the silence wasn't relief. It was a verdict. He lived now in a small apartment overlooking the Sound, not the penthouse with glass walls, but a rental with creaking floors and the hum of neighbors through thin drywall. The echo of wealth had left him, replaced by the sound of seagulls and the occasional siren from the street below. One morning, his email pinged with a message titled Opportunity. It was from a young tech company, Ledger One Solutions, a modest startup, barely known but promising a second chance to build something honest. The position offered was operations manager, half his old salary, no stock options, no executive car, just a desk, a paycheck, and work. Travis stared at the screen for a long time, half pay, half pride, half the man he'd once believed himself to be. He didn't reply right away. Pride delayed what humility would eventually accept. That afternoon, as he sat at the edge of his bed, a soft knock came at the door. He opened it to find Helen Carter standing there, holding a brown envelope. "Didn't expect to see you," he said, voice wary. She smiled faintly. "You probably didn't expect a lot of things that happened this year." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Fair." She handed him the envelope. "I came to drop this off. It's not from the board." He frowned. "Then from who?" "From Charles," she said. He hesitated before taking it, his fingers brushing the worn paper. "What is it?" Helen stepped back. "Just a message. Read it after I leave." When the door closed, Travis sat down again, staring at the envelope for what felt like hours before finally tearing it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in Charles's steady, precise hand. "Everyone starts small." That was it. No lecture, no pity, no signature flourish. Just 7 words. Clean, direct, true. Travis folded the note carefully and placed it on the table. For the first time in a long time, he let the silence around him feel less like punishment and more like permission. He opened his laptop again, found the Ledger One email, and typed a simple response: "I accept." Across town, in a modest office of the Balance Project, Charles was reviewing workshop applications when Helen walked in. She didn't speak right away, just set her bag down and smiled. "He took the job," she said. Charles didn't look up immediately. He finished signing the form in front of him, capped his pen, and nodded. "Good." "That's all you have to say?" Helen teased gently. "Everyone starts small," he repeated, the corner of his mouth lifting just slightly. Meanwhile, Olivia's life had steadied. The divorce papers were finalized. The name Reed officially dropped. She'd returned to using Bennett Reed only for Noah's sake, a bridge between past and future. Her confidence had returned in quiet, visible ways, the way she walked, the way she smiled without apology. She'd begun helping full-time at the Balance Project, coordinating volunteers and managing logistics. Purpose suited her. Noah, now 16, spent his weekends alternating between homes, Saturdays with his father, Sundays with his grandfather. He never spoke about the tension that once divided them. He didn't need to. Time had softened the edges. At Charles's home one Sunday evening, Noah sat by the window sketching ideas for the next community event flyer. "Mom says Dad's working again," he said casually. Charles didn't look up from his book. "That's good." "He seems quieter now," Noah added. "That's better," Charles replied. Olivia, carrying in a tray of lemonade, smiled at her father's understatement. "You always manage to say the most with the least." Charles closed the book gently. "Words are like numbers," he said. "They mean more when they're exact." Outside, the rain began again, light, rhythmic, steady. Somewhere across the city, in a small cubicle under fluorescent lights, Travis finished his first day at Ledger One. His new ID badge hung crooked on his shirt. He shut down his computer, looked out at the skyline, and exhaled. Maybe this was what balance felt like. Not victory, not defeat, but motion in the right direction. He thought of Charles's note again. Everyone starts small, and for once, Travis didn't argue. He simply nodded to himself, the faintest trace of humility crossing his face. The evening air carried the soft chill of early autumn, the kind that hinted at change without announcing it. Olivia's small house glowed warmly from within, laughter, clinking glasses, and the faint hum of jazz filling the space. For the first time in a long time, it felt like home. She moved between the kitchen and dining room, arranging plates and straightening silverware that didn't match, but gleamed from careful polishing. The table was modest. Roasted chicken, vegetables, bread still steaming. Nothing extravagant, everything sincere. Charles sat near the window, quietly sipping tea. His brown blazer hung neatly on his shoulders, pressed and timeless. Noah, now taller, leaned against the counter, grinning. "You're wearing that jacket again, huh?" Charles glanced down, smiling faintly. "It served me well." "It's like your superhero cape," Noah teased. "Only, corduroy." Charles chuckled softly. "Every accountant needs armor." They both laughed, the sound easy, unguarded, the kind that only comes after long storms finally clear. Olivia appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a towel. "He's coming," she said quietly. The laughter faded slightly, but not into tension, more into reflection. Charles set down his cup. "Then let's make sure dinner stays warm." Half an hour later, the doorbell rang. Olivia hesitated, took a steadying breath, then opened the door. Travis stood there, hat in hand, dressed in simple clothes, a gray sweater, clean but worn jeans, humility sewn into the seams. The man who once dripped with arrogance now carried himself differently. His posture was straighter, but his pride was gone. "Thank you for inviting me," he said quietly. Olivia nodded, stepping aside. Your family, Travis. That never really stopped being true. He stepped in, glancing around the cozy room. The faint smell of lemon cleaner, the warmth of the light, the framed photo of Noah on the piano. It all looked like the life he'd once taken for granted. Noah came forward first, breaking the silence. Hey, Dad. Travis's voice softened. Hey, buddy. Charles rose from his chair. Their eyes met across the room, not as enemies, not even as rivals, but as men who finally understood the weight of their choices. Travis crossed the floor slowly, extending his hand. His voice trembled slightly as he said, That's a good jacket. Charles looked at him for a moment, then smiled, genuine, warm, forgiving. Finally fits the occasion. The handshake lingered longer than either expected, not firm like business, not weak like regret, but steady, human. Olivia watched from the kitchen doorway, her shoulders lowering, her breath easing out in relief. The tension that had haunted every family gathering for years evaporated in that single moment, replaced by something fragile but real, humility. Dinner was simple but full. Conversation moved like the meal, slow, careful, but nourishing. Noah shared stories from school. Olivia spoke about upcoming workshops at the Balance Project. Travis listened more than he spoke, nodding often, smiling quietly. When Charles mentioned a new batch of volunteers joining the foundation, Travis leaned forward. Maybe I could help sometime, he said softly. Charles didn't react right away. He cut a small piece of chicken, took a sip of water, then said, That would be welcome. No judgment, no irony, just inclusion. The meal ended with pie, the same lemon meringue Charles's late wife used to bake. Olivia had made it from her mother's recipe. When she served a slice to her father, he looked at her with quiet pride. Perfect, he said. For the first time that night, Travis smiled fully. She gets that from you, he said. Charles shook his head. No, from her mother. The air shifted, not heavy, but filled with ghosts acknowledged and forgiven. As the evening wound down, Olivia gathered dishes, while Noah played a soft tune on the piano. The last notes lingered in the air like the scent of lemon and rain. Travis stood to leave, pausing by the door. Thank you, he said again. Charles simply nodded. Take care of yourself. Outside, the night was cool, the rain just beginning to fall, gentle, cleansing. Through the window, Travis looked back once to see the family sitting together, the glow of the table light warm against the dark. Inside, Charles adjusted his blazer, feeling its familiar weight. It wasn't just a jacket anymore. It was history, closure, and quiet pride stitched into one. He looked at Olivia and Noah, smiling softly. Balance restored, he murmured. And as the rain fell, the audience, if they could see it, would exhale with them, feeling the rare satisfaction of a story coming full circle, not through revenge, but through understanding. The morning of the ceremony was clear, uncharacteristically sunny for Seattle. The kind of day that made the city seem scrubbed clean, glass, sky, and water in perfect balance. Charles arrived early, as he always did, the brown blazer buttoned neatly, his steps measured but unhurried. The Balance Project had grown since its founding. Classrooms filled with volunteers, students, even small business owners who had found a kind of quiet redemption in learning the value of integrity. Today, however, the crowd was larger. The board had arranged a small event to dedicate their newest classroom, built with the final contribution from Charles's Paragon dividends. He had insisted the funds be used not for expansion or publicity, but for something simple, education. Let the room teach honesty, he'd said. Inside, the new wing gleamed with fresh paint and clean light. Rows of chairs lined the modest space, facing a covered plaque on the far wall. Helen stood near the front, flipping through her notes, ready to lead the short ceremony. Olivia helped arrange refreshments while Noah adjusted the banner that read, "Dedication Ceremony, The Balance Project." As guests filed in, Charles lingered near the back, quietly observing. He wasn't used to attention. In his mind, the donation wasn't generosity. It was a final equation brought to its rightful close. Helen stepped to the podium, clearing her throat. "Today," she began, "we honor not just a contribution of money, but a contribution of principle. This project was built on the idea that integrity doesn't retire, it multiplies." Her voice caught slightly as she looked toward Charles. "Our founder believed that when you give without expecting return, that's when the balance sheet of life truly settles." She turned to the plaque, still hidden beneath a white cloth. "It's my privilege to unveil this on behalf of the Balance Project, in honor of the man whose quiet lessons changed not just a company, but a community." With a gentle tug, the cloth fell away. The metal gleamed in the sunlight streaming through the window. The inscription was simple, engraved in clean serif letters. "The Charles Bennett Classroom. Paid in full." For a long moment, no one moved. The words seemed to echo silently through the space. Not prideful, not grandiose, just true. Olivia pressed her fingers to her mouth, eyes brimming with tears. Noah reached for her hand, his own eyes shining. Helen turned back toward Charles, smiling through her emotion. "We can't thank you enough," she said softly. Charles gave a small nod. "No need to. It was a debt I owed myself." From the last row, a subtle shift. Travis sat quietly, half in shadow. No one had announced him, but he had come anyway. His hands clasped tightly in his lap, his expression unreadable. When the applause began, he didn't join in immediately. Then slowly, he lifted his hands and clapped, once, twice, steady and sincere. Charles noticed. Their eyes met for just a second. Not as rivals, but as two men who finally understood the cost of peace. As the audience rose to their feet, the sound of applause filled the room. Not thunderous, but warm, like the steady pulse of rain after a storm. For Charles, it wasn't triumph. It was closure. Not vengeance, but completion. He looked up once more at the plaque, paid in full, and smiled faintly, knowing it wasn't just about money. It was about balance, finally restored. The afternoon light slanted through the window blinds, striping the small study in warm bands of gold and gray. Outside, rain tapped steadily against the glass, the familiar rhythm of Seattle in spring. Inside, the air smelled faintly of tea and old paper. Charles sat in his favorite chair, glasses perched low on his nose, reviewing a ledger that had long since been balanced. Across from him, Noah adjusted his tablet and pressed record. "Okay, Grandpa," he said, his teenage voice half serious, half nervous. "This is for my school project. They want us to interview someone who taught us something important about life." Charles looked up, amused. "And you picked me?" "Of course," Noah said. "You're like a local legend." Charles chuckled softly. "A legend is just an old man who's lived long enough for people to forget his mistakes." Noah grinned. "Yeah, but yours are famous." The old man shook his head, smiling. "Ask your questions, smart aleck." Noah cleared his throat, glancing at the list on his screen. "Okay, first one. What's the hardest kind of math?" Charles leaned back, thinking. The rain kept its steady rhythm outside, as though waiting for his answer. Finally, he said, "The kind that counts respect." Noah frowned, intrigued. "Respect? Like, how?" Charles folded his hands in his lap. "Most math is about numbers. What you have, what you owe, what you gain. But respect, that's a different equation. It doesn't live on paper. You can't add it by talking or subtract it by losing money. You earn it quietly, over time, by doing what's right when nobody's keeping score." Noah tapped a note on his tablet. So it's not measurable? Oh, it's measurable, Charles said, but not in dollars, in peace. When your balance sheet matches your conscience, that's the cleanest math you'll ever do. They both laughed softly then, the easy kind of laughter that lives between generations. Charles took a slow sip of tea, his gaze drifting toward the window, where the rain blurred the world into soft motion. From the hallway, Olivia paused, unseen, listening. She leaned against the door frame, one hand resting on the wall. There was a tenderness in her expression, the kind that comes from watching time pass gently, knowing that the moments you once prayed for have quietly arrived. Noah asked his next question, his voice a little quieter now. Do you think balance always comes back, even when it feels impossible? Charles nodded, his eyes glinting. Always. Balance doesn't disappear. It just waits for the noise to settle. Truth has patience. Most people don't. He reached out, gently tapping the notebook on Noah's lap. Write that down, future accountant. Noah grinned. You sure you don't want to be my co-author? I've already written my book, Charles said softly. Just not on paper. They sat in companionable silence for a few moments, the kind that doesn't demand to be filled. The rain outside eased slightly, tapering to a drizzle. Olivia stepped into the room, pretending she hadn't been eavesdropping. How's the interview going? Done, Noah said proudly. He gave me like 10 life lessons in one sitting. Charles smiled. Charge him extra for editing. Olivia shook her head, amused. You two are impossible. As Noah packed up his things, Charles looked at him one last time, voice soft but firm. Remember this, Noah. Balance always returns. It might take time, but it always finds its way back. Noah nodded, the weight of those words landing even if he didn't yet understand their full meaning. Outside, the clouds began to break apart, streaks of light piercing through the gray. The skyline shimmered, rain slick and shining, a city cleansed, yet alive. Charles turned toward the window, the reflection of his family faint in the glass beside him. His eyes softened with peace, not pride. In the distance, thunder rolled once, then faded, not a warning this time, but a reminder. Balance, indeed, had returned. The afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the quiet office of the Balance Project. Boxes lined the walls, labeled in Helen's neat handwriting, reports, archives, personal files. The air carried that bittersweet mix of dust, old paper, and endings. Helen Carter stood by her desk, slipping the last folder into a worn leather briefcase. The gold letters on the door, Helen Carter, head auditor, caught the light one last time. She smiled faintly at the irony. After decades spent chasing numbers, it was words that weighed on her most today. Charles entered, holding 2 cups of coffee. Figured you wouldn't leave without caffeine, he said softly. Helen chuckled, accepting the cup. Still know my vices. Just the manageable ones, he replied. They sat together amid the boxes, surrounded by the quiet hum of an office that had balanced hundreds of books and a few hearts. The clock ticked, unhurried. So, Charles said after a moment, this is it. Helen exhaled slowly. 40 years of audits. I think I've earned a nap. You've earned more than that, Charles said. She looked at him then. Really looked. You know, you were right all along. About what? That numbers tell stories. She gestured toward the shelves. We used to think we were just reconciling accounts, but every number, every miscalculation, every missing zero, it's a confession. People hide behind figures the way they hide behind words. You always knew how to read between the lines. Charles smiled gently. Comes from being lied to often enough. Helen walked to one of the boxes and pulled out a large black binder, edges softened with time. She held it out to him. "This belongs with you." He recognized it immediately, the original audit binder from Paragon Systems, the one that had started everything. The weight of it in his hands was more than paper. It was a chapter, a reckoning, a ledger of what had been made right. "I thought this was sealed," he said quietly. "It is," Helen replied, "but I'm retiring, not disappearing, and I trust you'll keep it safe." Charles turned the binder over once, running his thumb along the spine. "You sure about this?" She nodded. "You were the one who finished the story. It should end where it began." They stood there in silence for a moment, the faint sound of traffic below drifting up through the half-open window. Later that evening at home, Charles placed the binder on his desk. The room was filled with the soft glow of a single lamp. The brown blazer hung on the back of his chair, a quiet sentinel. He opened the safe built into the wall, small, unassuming, and placed the binder inside. Before closing it, he took a piece of masking tape and wrote carefully in blue ink, "For Noah." As he pressed the tape down, his voice was low but clear. "Let him learn how honesty pays." Behind him, Helen's voice broke the silence. She had followed him home to drop off one last envelope of paperwork. "You built revenge like an equation," she said gently from the doorway. Charles smiled without turning around. "No," he replied, "like a correction." Helen leaned against the doorframe, her eyes soft with admiration. "You've managed what most men never do. You balanced justice with mercy." He locked the safe and turned toward her. "Balance doesn't work without both." They stood for a long moment in the golden light of the study, two old friends, two bookkeepers of truth, bound by shared respect. Finally, Helen broke the silence with a faint, tired laugh. "Well, accountant, I suppose this is goodbye." "Goodbye for now," Charles said, "but not for good. We're still on the same ledger." She smiled, eyes glinting. "Always." As she stepped out into the twilight, Charles sat back down by the window, the city skyline shimmering with a soft, fading glow. The rain had stopped again, not cleared, just paused, like a story catching its breath before its final chapter. In the reflection of the glass, his own calm face looked back at him, framed by the soft gleam of the safe behind him. A man at peace, yet still vigilant, the keeper of the last account. It arrived on a calm Sunday morning, tucked between a few bills and a grocery flyer. The envelope was cream-colored, slightly uneven at the edges, as though it had been sealed and reopened twice before being sent. The handwriting on the front was familiar, slanted, deliberate, but hesitant in a way it hadn't been before. Charles turned it over once in his hand before opening it. He didn't rush. He rarely did. The paper inside was thick, the kind used for important things. The ink bled slightly along the edges of each letter, the mark of someone who hadn't written by hand in a long time. "Charles, I don't know how to start this, so I'll just say it. Thank you. Not for what you did, though it took me months to even say those words, but for showing me what real wealth is. I used to think it was control, or comfort, or applause, but it's not. It's peace. It's looking at yourself and not needing to hide. You gave that back to me, even after I tried to take your dignity away. You didn't humiliate me. You educated me. I was blind, and you didn't punish me for it. You just let me see the bill. You were right. Balance always returns." Travis. Charles stared at the page for a long time. His eyes lingered on that last sentence. Balance always returns. The words looked different written in Travis's hand, almost as if they had traveled through fire and come out softer. He set the letter down gently beside his tea, the cup's steam curling upward like a quiet exhale. For a few seconds, he just watched the paper, the way sunlight touched the ink, and he sighed. Not in weariness, but release. Olivia came into the room carrying a basket of folded laundry. You've been staring at that letter for 10 minutes, she said lightly. Who's it from? Charles didn't look up right away. Travis. Her hands froze mid-motion. He wrote you? He nodded and passed the paper to her. She read it silently, her expression shifting. First surprise, then reflection, then something softer. When she finished, she handed it back to him carefully, as if it were something fragile. Well, she said quietly, I suppose he's learning. Charles smiled faintly. He's learning interest. Olivia tilted her head, smirking despite herself. Compound interest, she replied. They both laughed, not the sharp laugh of irony or triumph, but a low, shared warmth. Years of tension melted in that small exchange. The sound filled the house with something lighter than silence, the sound of family finally breathing again. The door creaked open, and Lydia stepped in, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She'd stopped by to help with Sunday dinner, her timing perfect as always. Well, what's so funny? She asked, setting down a bowl of herbs on the counter. Charles folded the letter neatly and slipped it back into its envelope. Just a note from an old account, he said. Lydia smiled knowingly. Guess the account's finally balanced. He looked at her, the glint of humor in her eye, the way she said it without judgment or pride. Seems so, he said quietly. Outside, the rain began again, soft, rhythmic, familiar. The sound had stopped meaning sadness long ago. Now it was simply a reminder. Things wash away, and what remains is what's meant to. Olivia glanced out the window, her reflection beside her father's. You ever think you'd end up here? She asked softly. Charles smiled, his eyes still on the rain. No, he said, but it's exactly where I belong. He placed the envelope inside the top drawer of his desk, not hidden, just kept. Then he poured another cup of tea and sat by the window, watching as the gray sky began to thin, light breaking through in faint streaks across the sound. No dramatic music, no applause, no final reckoning, just peace. And for Charles Bennett, that was the wealth he'd been counting on all along. The community center buzzed with quiet anticipation, the kind of energy that comes before something meaningful begins. The Balance Project had grown beyond its modest roots. The sign outside now read, Free Financial Literacy. Every life deserves balance. Inside, the classrooms were full. Retirees clutching notebooks, teenagers scrolling through budgeting apps, young couples whispering about mortgages and hope. Charles stood at the front of the largest room, his brown blazer fitting a little looser these days, but still sharp, the fabric holding the weight of a lifetime. He adjusted his glasses and smiled as the chatter softened. Olivia stood near the back, clipboard in hand, organizing volunteers, while Noah helped an elderly woman find a seat. And near the supply table, quiet, unnoticed except by a few, Travis Reed stacked boxes of workbooks, sleeves rolled up. He didn't seek acknowledgement. He just worked, focused, steady. When he caught Charles's glance across the room, there was no tension, only mutual recognition, the unspoken language of men who had finally learned the difference between pride and purpose. Charles turned toward the room. All right, he began, his voice calm but carrying easily. Before we start with numbers, let's talk about something more valuable, dignity. The room stilled. He paced slowly between the rows of chairs, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. Money can buy comfort, but it can't buy clarity. If you spend your life measuring your worth in what you can purchase, you'll always come up short. The goal isn't to have the biggest account. It's to know it's clean. To budget with dignity. He paused, smiling faintly at the phrase. Budget with dignity. That's today's lesson. Laughter rippled softly through the group, not mockery, warmth. He continued, outlining small practical principles, mixing them with gentle humor. A receipt isn't just paper, he said. It's a story. Every dollar you spend tells the world what you value. The question is, are you keeping the right receipts? The audience leaned in, even the young ones, even the skeptical. The words weren't just about money, they were about life. Olivia moved among the rows, handing out pens and worksheets. Her smile mirrored her father's calm, rooted, genuine. Noah passed out pamphlets labeled "Balance Starts Here," his voice bright with confidence. Near the back, Travis quietly replaced a flickering bulb. Nobody noticed but Charles. Their eyes met briefly again, and this time Charles gave a single nod. Acknowledgement, not forgiveness, because that had already been given long ago. As the session drew to a close, Charles gestured toward a whiteboard where a single phrase was written in bold letters: "Honesty pays interest." He set down his marker, leaning lightly against the desk. "When I was younger," he said, "I thought accounting was about precision. Later, I learned it's about patience. Every error, every debt, every loss, they all have a way of finding their way back to zero. The trick," he paused, his gaze sweeping the room, "is making sure that when the balance returns, you're proud of the record you've kept." The room fell silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, applause began. Soft at first, then growing until it filled the room like a wave. Olivia looked around, her heart full. Noah grinned. Even Travis, standing quietly in the back, clapped once, then twice, genuine, steady. The sound swelled and then softened, replaced by something even richer: connection. The circle, at last, had closed. As the applause faded, Charles looked out the window at the skyline, light breaking through after a morning rain. The city shimmered, alive and reflective, like a ledger washed clean. Then came his closing words, spoken not just to the room, but to everyone who had followed his story, whether they knew it or not. "Respect," he said, his voice low but firm, "is the only currency that never devalues." The audience held on to that line, the weight of it, the truth in it, as if it were something sacred. And as the lights dimmed and the crowd slowly dispersed, soft jazz began to play, the same tune that had once underscored humiliation, now reborn as peace. Charles remained at the front, collecting papers, his movements slow, deliberate. Behind him, his family and his former adversary worked side by side, their laughter faint, their harmony earned. Outside, the sign glowed warmly against the evening sky: "The Balance Project. Paid in full." The morning sun hit the corner cafe window, just as Olivia opened the folded newspaper. Her coffee sat untouched beside her, steam curling into the crisp Seattle air. There, above the fold, in bold serif letters, was the headline that made her breath catch: "The man who paid the bill that changed everything." Beneath it, a full-page photo: Charles Bennett, standing in front of the Balance Project's new building, brown blazer spotless, hands folded neatly. The photographer had caught him mid-smile, not wide, not performative, just humble. The kind of smile that belonged to a man who had stopped chasing things and started resting in truth. Olivia traced the edges of the paper with her fingers, a warmth spreading in her chest. She turned to the byline and read aloud the first lines. In an age defined by headlines of greed and scandal, one man reminded Seattle that integrity still balances the books. Charles Bennett, retired accountant, widower, teacher, didn't seek revenge when mocked at a dinner table. Instead, he quietly paid a bill that would expose corporate misuse and ignite a movement for ethical leadership and financial literacy across the city. She smiled through tears. "He'd hate this," she murmured to herself. "Too much spotlight." Still, she folded the paper neatly and tucked it into her tote, already imagining the spot on the living room wall where she'd frame it. Across town, Charles sat by his window, reading the same feature. The morning light bathed the page in soft gold. He chuckled quietly when he saw the headline. "The bill that changed everything," he muttered. "All that for soup and humility." He turned the page slowly, eyes scanning the article. Quotes from Helen, from Olivia, even from former Paragon employees filled the column. Words like quiet revolution, financial integrity, and living example. But what made him pause was one brief line near the end. When asked what he learned from it all, Bennett simply replied, "Balance always returns." He set the paper down, smiling faintly. "They got that part right," he said softly. Just then, his phone buzzed, a message notification. The name on the screen stopped him for a moment. Travis Reed. He opened it. Read the article. Deserved. 2 words, no embellishment, no attempt to rewrite history, just acknowledgement. Charles stared at the message for a while before typing a simple response. Balance found. He didn't hit send. He didn't need to. Instead, he locked the phone and leaned back in his chair, letting the quiet speak for both of them. Later that day, Olivia hung the framed feature in the hallway at the Balance Project. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "Integrity in Practice." Noah stood beside her, eyes wide, pride glowing in his teenage face. "Mom," he said, "can I take a picture of it? For school?" "Of course," she said, smiling. "You know, you might get extra credit just for being related." He grinned. "I'll take it." A week later, in a bright classroom filled with chatter and fluorescent light, Noah stood in front of his classmates, holding up the laminated newspaper page. "This is my grandpa," he began. The room quieted. Even the teacher, a young woman in her 30s, usually strict about time, leaned forward slightly. "He's the founder of the Balance Project," Noah continued. "He taught people how to manage money, but also how to manage respect. When people made fun of him, he didn't fight back. He just fixed the math." He paused, smiling as he held up the photo. "And that's him, the man who paid the bill that changed everything." The teacher's eyes softened. "That's incredible, Noah. You must be very proud." He nodded, his voice steady. "Yeah, I am." Applause filled the room, gentle but genuine. As Noah sat down, he looked out the window. Rain fell lightly over the city, thin rays of sunlight breaking through in slanted beams. At home, that same light touched the framed headline in the Balance Project hallway. Charles walked past it later that afternoon, pausing just long enough to straighten the frame before continuing toward the classrooms. No need for grand speeches. The story was already told, by action, by legacy, by quiet dignity, passed from one generation to the next. The morning air carried that early spring stillness, a calm that felt deliberate, like the city itself was holding its breath. Charles walked slowly down the familiar hallway of the Balance Project, the soft thud of his shoes echoing off the freshly waxed floors. The building smelled faintly of coffee and paper, the scent of purpose. It had been 5 years since that first workshop, 5 years of steady growth, of lives changed, of dignity restored one ledger at a time. The foundation now ran on its own momentum, propelled by volunteers who believed in the quiet power of fairness. And now, it was time for him to step back. In the conference room, Olivia and Noah waited for him. The morning light filtered through the glass walls, casting long lines across the table where files and reports were neatly stacked. Noah had grown taller, his confidence now easy, natural. Olivia looked composed, ready, the leader she'd become without even realizing it. Charles smiled at them both. "Feels strange," he said softly. "This room used to echo." Olivia grinned. "Now it hums." He nodded, resting his hands on the back of a chair. "You've both done well. Better than I ever expected." Noah glanced at his grandfather, the brown blazer that had followed every milestone draped neatly over Charles's shoulders. "You're really retiring?" he asked, half teasing, half afraid. Charles exhaled through a quiet smile. "I've balanced enough books for one lifetime. Olivia handed him a small envelope. Inside was a printed resolution signed by every board member. Resolution 47, Charles Bennett, Founder Emeritus, The Balance Project. He read it silently, then folded it carefully. "You know, it's funny," he said, his tone reflective. "All this started because of a dinner bill." Olivia laughed softly. "And a very bad joke." Charles's eyes twinkled. "The best math always starts with mistakes." He turned to Noah. "You'll take care of the outreach programs?" "Already planning the next one," Noah said. "We're calling it Receipts of Respect." Charles chuckled. "Good. Keep receipts, but forgive interest." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "That's going on a plaque somewhere." He looked at them both, not with the pride of ownership, but with the quiet satisfaction of completion. "This place is yours now," he said. "Make sure it stays honest." They nodded, understanding that his request wasn't administrative, it was moral. After the meeting, Charles walked the building one last time. He paused at the classrooms, listening to the low murmur of lessons being taught. Budgeting tips, small business planning, personal finance for teens. The hum of learning filled the halls, the same rhythm that once filled his own lectures. He stopped by the wall of photographs near the entrance, snapshots of workshops, events, volunteers, faces lit with purpose. Near the center hung the framed newspaper headline, "The Man Who Paid the Bill That Changed Everything." He smiled faintly at it. "I suppose that's true," he murmured. Behind him, footsteps approached, slow, familiar. Helen. She looked older, but the spark in her eyes hadn't dulled. "I thought I'd find you here," she said. He turned, smiling. "Couldn't leave without one last audit." She laughed softly. "Everything still balances, I assume." "Better than ever," he said. Helen stepped closer, eyes misty. "You know," she said, voice low, "you turned revenge into a blueprint for redemption. Not many men can do that." He shook his head. "I didn't redeem anyone. I just corrected a few ledgers." She hugged him then, firm, sincere. "Goodbye, Charles." "Goodbye, Helen," he said. "Don't let them mess up the math while I'm gone." When she left, Charles walked to his office, small, orderly, and full of memories. He looked around one last time, then unbuttoned his brown blazer. Carefully, he draped it over the back of his chair. The fabric caught the afternoon light, its folds soft, the shoulders still square. The same blazer that had witnessed humiliation, revenge, and forgiveness now hung as quiet testament, not to victory, but to endurance. Charles stood in the doorway, taking it all in. The hum of the halls, the laughter from the next room, the foundation alive and moving forward. His work was done, but its echo would remain. He smiled once more, eyes steady, then turned off the light. Outside, the day was clear. No rain, no storm, just balance. And as the door closed behind him, the camera of memory lingered on the brown blazer, bathed in sunlight, a symbol left behind. Legacy secured. The Seattle skyline glowed under the fading orange of sunset, glass towers catching the last light like a row of burning lanterns. The city moved slowly beneath it, ferries cutting across the sound, streetlights flickering to life one by one, and the low hum of rain clouds gathering at the horizon. In a quiet house overlooking the water, Charles Bennett sat by the window, a single lamp casting a warm circle of light around him. His old ledger lay closed on the desk, his glasses folded neatly beside it. The numbers inside had long been reconciled. The work of his life had found its symmetry. He leaned back in his chair, breathing evenly, peace etched into the lines of his face. His hands rested on the arms of the chair, still, steady, the kind of stillness that comes not from exhaustion, but completion. For a long time, he watched the horizon. Then, almost to himself, he whispered, "Debt settled, lesson learned." The words hung in the air, simple and final, like the last note of a song that no one wanted to end. A soft knock came at the door, followed by Olivia's familiar voice. "Dad, we're here." Charles turned, smiling. "Come in, come in." Olivia entered carrying a casserole dish, Noah close behind her with a bag of groceries. The same rhythm, the same laughter, but now gentler, freer. Noah had grown into his shoulders, taller now, his confidence quiet but firm. Olivia set the dish down on the table, straightened the silverware, and looked around the room. "Smells like you've been burning candles again," she teased. "Better than burning bridges," Charles replied with a wink. Noah laughed. "You're still the king of one-liners." "That's called compound wisdom," Charles said, chuckling softly. They gathered around the dining table, the same one from the old house, polished, scarred, but faithful. The chairs creaked in familiar protest as they sat. It was the same table where Charles once ate in silence after humiliation, where apologies were exchanged, and where forgiveness had quietly taken root. Now it was filled with warmth, the clinking of plates, the laughter between generations, the easy rhythm of a family that had survived itself. Olivia poured tea while Noah told stories about school and a part-time job at the community center. Charles listened more than he spoke, his eyes moving between them, his expression soft. There was a kind of wealth here that couldn't be counted. After dinner, as Olivia cleared the dishes and Noah busied himself in the kitchen, Charles's gaze drifted toward the far wall. There, above a simple wooden shelf, hung a single framed document, yellowed slightly with age, but still clear. The Azure Room, paid. The receipt from that first dinner, preserved behind glass. He stood slowly, walking over to it. The paper caught the lamp's glow, the ink faded, but legible, the signature, Travis Reed, still visible. Charles studied it for a long moment, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He remembered the humiliation, the laughter, the quiet decision he made that night to never fight fire with fire, to let truth do the accounting. And here it was, the balance sheet of his life, settled. Behind him, Olivia's voice carried softly from the kitchen. "Dad, dessert's ready." He turned back, eyes bright with peace. "Coming." Outside, the rain began again, soft, rhythmic, familiar. It fell against the window pane in gentle streaks, the sound merging with the faint jazz, playing from the old record player in the corner. Charles sat back down at the table, the warm lamplight catching his features. The calm of a man who had learned that revenge fades, but balance endures. He looked once more at the framed bill, raised his teacup slightly in a quiet toast, and whispered, "Paid in full." The camera of imagination pulled back, through the window, into the rain-soaked evening. The city below shimmered with life, the sound reflecting soft light like moving glass. As the music swelled, the frame slowed on the glow of the house, small but steadfast against the drizzle. Then, in white lettering across the fading skyline, the final words appeared, "Balance always finds its way." The jazz softened, rain blending with melody, and then silence.